Welcome, everybody. This is Andres Martinez, and today I'm going to be the chairperson, taking care of the introduction of this track and also facilitation of the question and answer along the different presentation. This is the Spanish industry case study track, part of the International Conference on Software Engineering. And today we are going to introduce several case studies of the Spanish industry, working with software and developing interesting experiences on software development. So behind this track, there is an interesting story. Last Christmas, I had a meeting with Natalia Juristo, which is one of the organizer of this conference, and we were discussing about different aspect of software engineering research. And then I realized that there was this year conference was organized in Spain, and it was interesting because I was in Montreal 2 years ago. I discovered there that there were plenty of use cases of local industry, very interesting stories. And I thought that maybe we could organize something similar to trying to highlight how these activities are also happening in the Spanish industry. So we discovered along the following month that there is a lot of interesting situation, starting with how hard is define what is an Spanish industry. With the globalization, with the lockdown, developers, software engineers are working from everywhere, and actually there are many of the companies presenting today which are working from different locations. In any case, we were looking for interesting stories. We were contacting with many local industries, trying to understand what might be the contribution of these companies to the field of the software engineering. So today, this is an online event. As you can imagine, pandemia is still keeping people without traveling, working from home. So we expect you all stay safe and healthy, and we expect also that you enjoy this format. But in order to be sure that we interact properly, allow me to remind the code of conduct. So you can check the details of the code of conduct in the landing page of the conference. We also prepare a public landing page with additional details to invite everybody. This is a public and open track, so there are many people connecting to the YouTube channel. But in any case, please keep this code of conduct in mind. and we can summarize briefly saying that yes, be friendly, assume good intention, and yeah, don't forget that this is an open event with people coming from many different countries, culture, background, and context. So please follow these guidelines to be sure that we interact properly. This event is, as I mentioned before, is streamed through YouTube. So we are going to have the chat of the um, YouTube as a way to interact with the speaker, allowing you to make questions and also share thought there. So the theme of the track, the your question, your thoughts in there, and we will follow up those questions with the speaker. So yeah, this is going to be the way to interact. As you can check in the program site, we have a schedule for 7 talks. So at the end, the duration of the different talk was slightly different. So maybe at the end of the shorter, we will have 3 minutes on hold, waiting for the next time for the next talk. So just follow the schedule to be sure that you join properly. You are going to skip one of the talk. Before to continue, allow me to also share a little bit about the context of the team. You can check our profiles in the landing page of the program, but we are a team of 6 people um, with different background. We have also people coming from academia, industry, companies working from Spain, from outside. So at the end, it was a quite diverse organization committee, and then that was interesting because at the end we contribute with different contacts and different ideas. So Aurora Barrero was going to be here as a chairperson as well with me. Unfortunately, there was a last minute problem, so she is not going to be here today. We have also Gonzalo Ruiz de Villa um, from Spain, Jose Manrique working with Bitergia. He is going to be also one of the speakers today. Javier Provecho from Telefonica. He is also one of the presenter, one of the speakers. And finally, Victor Sanchez, which is going to host the panel that we will run at the end of this session. So that is an interesting detail, an important detail, because finally we decide to organize a panel of a speaker at the end of the session. So later today at 9:05 Central European Time, we will have a panel with the speaker, with some of them. So if you are interested in, know more stories on the even share your question and to have a real-time answer to this question, feel free to join to our channel later today also for this panel. Everything is going to be on this YouTube channel, so you don't have to change anything. So before to start, we have 3 more minutes, so allow me to review the presentation today. After this opening, we are going to start with a very interesting talk coming from Igalia. Igalia is probably familiar to those people working with web technologies, open source technologies. So they have been contributing a lot to Chrome and many other web technologies. So they are going to present a summary of the main contribution in the last year, the recent contribution to a Chromium project. This is a presentation with Mario Sanchez from Italia. After that presentation, we will have Jose Manrique presenting their experience in Vitorgia. This is a very interesting talk because they started very, very early when the people didn't care that much about open source. And the approach for Vitegia was to introduce qualitative and quantitative details, information about open source. And they are already the main source of information about open source projects for many important companies in the world. After that presentation, we will have Pablo Moncada from MassMobile. He is going to be presenting about how his company is facing the development of a telco in a cloud. This is also interesting in the sense that most of the companies right now are software company, but even a telco, which is in some cases quite traditional company, you can face this area, this sector, with a quite, let's say, innovative approach. We will have Pablo Moncada presenting this talk. Next talk is going to be from Odin. Odin Software is a small company. Rafael Marin is working there. He's a PhD, and he's going to present about cybersecurity and interoperability for Internet of Things solution, but apply a very interesting area, which is smart agriculture. So once again, don't miss this presentation, because in particular for a country like Spain, where agriculture is so important, yeah, I think this is a very interesting one. Finally, we have 3 more talks. We will have another talk. There is a mistake here in the agenda. We are going to have actually a presentation about experiences with technology transfer with Juan Quemada from the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. There was a very last minute change, so forgive us about this mistake, but this is going to be the next talk. And then we will have Javier Provecho presenting about how DevOps is implemented following a software engineering principle in Telefonica Tech. The last talk for today before the panel will be managing scalability in the spatiotemporal data environment, coming from Miguel Angel. Let me check here the name. Miguel Angel Correa from GeoBlink is a company from Madrid, and he's going to present how they manage this kind of data in a very interesting new approach. Remember, after this very last talk, we will have a panel with all the speakers, so you can continue the conversation and join the discussion between the speaker at 9:05 Central European Time. And with that, we can start with the first presentation.
Hello, thanks for coming to this talk. My name is Mario. I'm going to talk about our contributions at Igalia to the Chromium open source project in the past year and a half. So first, an introduction about me. I'm a computer science engineer. I'm a partner of Igalia as well and a member of his Chromium team. I'm involved as part of different open source communities as well, like the Chromium community, obviously, but also WebKit and the GNOME project. And also in the past, I did other work non-related to web engines and browsers, like the development of Linux-based operating systems or the Samsung Smart TV platform. And a long time ago, I also worked on Nokia's Maemo project as part of the APT and Hildon Application Manager components mainly. About Igalia, also some introduction. We are a highly specialized open source consultancy company. We run on an entirely flat structure, and we are headquartered in A Coruña, northwest of Spain, in Galicia. We have an office in there, but we are actually more than 100 people working from all over the world across 25 countries and 11 time zones. And we have different teams that are mostly related to browsers and web engines in a way or another. Like, for instance, the Chromium, the WebKit, and the web platform teams are the obvious ones, and then the compilers teams where they also work on JavaScript engines, and then also graphics, multimedia, and accessibility, where they do work not just for web browser, but also related to it. So what is Chromium, first of all? Chromium is a standalone free and open source web browser, pretty much like Firefox, for instance. It's licensed under the terms of the BSD license mostly, although for historical reasons, there are some bits still under the MIT, LGPL, or GPL, or other licenses as well. It's available for different platforms like Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, or Android, and it has been designed right from the start with a multi-process and modular architecture in mind. In particular, simplifying things a bit, we have here a browser process that deals with the entire application, and then at least one process per tab that we call a renderer process. And the idea is that if a tab crashes, it doesn't crash the entire browser. And this, about modular architecture, the most important module here is probably the content module, which is the one that you would use for embedding if you want to create a Chromium-based browser. And this content module is split in two parts, content browser and content renderer, implementing different sides of the multi-process architecture, as I said before. Also, Chromium is used as the base for several browsers out there, like Google Chrome, obviously, but also Samsung Internet Browser, Microsoft Edge, Opera, UC Browser, Brave, many others. And because of this reason, it achieved a market share of over 70% as of April 2021. Not just Google Chrome, I insist, but all of them together. Another interesting data point is that it grew very fast over the past 10 years. It moved from being nothing in 2009 to this point where it is right now. And that's about market share. So what is the difference between Chromium and Chrome? Chrome and Chromium are both free, as in free beer, as you don't have to pay for them. But only Chromium is fully open source in that you can build and modify it. Chrome is based on Chromium, obviously, and adds, unfortunately, some closed parts on top. Those parts include things like the automatic updater, API keys for Google services, or support for Netflix or non-free multimedia codecs. Because of this reason, Chrome cannot be built and cannot be freely redistributed either, like Chromium, like what is possible with Chromium. Obviously, there are different branding as well, and not just the name, but also the icon, as you can see here. Trying to give a visual idea of both browsers, you can see that it's very hard to distinguish which one is which, because unless you go to the Chrome version page and you look into the different branding elements, it's pretty much identical. So I said that Chromium is the whole browser, but obviously it doesn't do everything on its own. Chromium uses Blink as the web engine to render web content. Blink will be then the component that takes HTML and CSS code, parses it, and decides where to show up and how to show up content on the screen, how to respond to user interactions, and even implement JavaScript APIs. And as it comes for JavaScript APIs, it is necessary to execute JavaScript code at some point. So for that, Blink relies on the V8 JavaScript engine, which is what we use in Chromium. So this V8 JavaScript engine is therefore responsible for executing JavaScript code, but it's also interesting to know that it can be run independently of Chromium as well. And it's actually the base of Node.js, if you're familiar with it. So trying to give a visual idea of what each part is. So imagine you have a browser rendering a web page. So in this particular case, the entire window will be Chromium, the entire application with the tabs and the back and forward buttons. Then the content renderings for the tab will be Blink and V8 that will be in charge of running JavaScript code, like, for instance, what it will execute if you click on the play button here. So yeah, basically, Blink and V8 will be in charge of rendering the web content, and Chromium will be the entire thing. And just to finish this introduction, what is Chromium OS? You might have heard of it. Chromium OS is a full operating system built on top of Chromium, so not just a browser, but also the components necessary to put the machine and implement a modern desktop environment, like, for instance, session management, suspension and resume, hardware detection, a windowing system. Everything is implemented by Chromium OS here. And like Chromium versus Chrome, only Chromium OS is fully free in that you can build it and modify it. An interesting difference between Chromium and Chrome is that while it's very easy these days to use a Chromium-based browser, not just Google Chrome, but also Microsoft Edge or Samsung Internet Browser or Brave, it's not that easy to use a Chromium OS-based machine because Chromium OS is mostly popular via the so-called Chromebooks that you can buy in a shop. But nothing stops you from getting one of those machines and building Chromium OS yourself, make your modifications, and basically create your own version of Chromium OS, which will look basically like this. So I know it looks like just a browser, but you have to consider that in this particular case, Chromium is not just rendering the browser window, but everything else: the wallpaper, the bottom panel, the clock, the system menu, everything is Chromium OS. And with that introduction out of the way, let's go back to the topic of this talk and talk about what we at Igalia have contributed to the project in the past year and a half. So the first project I want to talk about is the code health effort. This is a big effort across the Chromium project that has different sub-projects. So in our particular case, we started working on the so-called onion soup project, which is, well, the reason of this name is because this project is about removing layers, and you know onions have a lot of layers. So this is the idea. So the more advanced idea is that, as I said before, you have the browser and the renderer process in the case of Chromium, and they communicate together through IPC. So the idea of this project is that at the moment, if you want to communicate from the browser process with the web engine, with Blink, you have to travel through a lot of layers. First, you have to go to content renderer, and then from content renderer, you have to traverse lots of layers to Blink. And those layers and those APIs made sense back in the day when Blink was actually not Blink, but WebKit, because Blink is a fork of WebKit. It made sense back in the day because WebKit was meant to be used by different embedders. But in the case of Chromium, Blink is only meant to be used by content renderers. So those different layers don't make that much sense anymore. So the idea here is to identify parts of content renderer that could be actually moved directly into Blink and then move them, which will allow us to remove all these unnecessary layers and APIs that are basically complicating things these days. So far in the context of this project, we did a lot of work in content renderer media directory. We finished WebRTC, audio, peer connection. We did work on content renderer Java directory as well, and content renderer accessibility. And we started moving the media Blink directory as well into Blink. And this process helped remove more than 200 definitions, not just classes and enumerations, but also entire files from Blink's public API. Also in the context of code health and related to Onion Soup, we have this other sub-project called Legacy IPC Migrations. So the idea here is that in Chromium, because you have different processes, you need IPC to communicate among them. So Chromium started using what now is known as the legacy IPC APIs, and that had a lot of problems. One of the problems was that in order to communicate between the browser process and other components, like for instance Blink, you would have to go through content renderer. This means that if you think of the previous slide, you may already realize that this is a blocker for the Onion Soup project, because you cannot move a module from content renderer down into Blink if that module is meant to communicate with the browser process. If once moved into Blink, you won't be able to establish some IPC mechanism directly between browser process and Blink. And this is what Mojo allows. So because of the reasons we worked on the migration of many legacy IPC messages, about 500 when we started. And at this moment, we are happy to say that the content module is nearly migrated. Only 3 messages remain. And migrations outside of content, the content directory have progressed as well very well. We are about 25% progress in there, and mostly focused right now on the extension directory. So for another topic, CSS, our web platform team, as usual, has been working on CSS. They implemented and shipped the marker pseudo element and some specs like CSS flow, relative shorthand, and offset properties. They also improved the performance of CSS custom properties and make changes to CSS test, line breaking, and new text break iterators default behavior. For CSS Grid, if you're not familiar, we at Igalia implemented this specification back in the day for Chromium. And in this period, we spent most time doing maintenance, fixing bugs and interoperability and performance issues. We also started working on CSS scroll bars and implemented changes to different pseudo classes like focus, visible, has, and dir. For accessibility, we enabled Linux accessibility mode on the fly during this period. This was a big deal because back in the day, well, before this change, if you needed to use a screen reader on Linux, for instance, and you needed to use it with Chromium, you would have to start Chromium first, enable accessibility, and then restart. And that was not great. So with this change, now Chromium auto-detects whether accessibility is enabled in the desktop, and you don't have to do anything. It just works. We also added support for more event types in Linux, and we improve accessibility debug tools as well. not just for Mac, but also extended cross-platform support and enable accessibility tools so that they work not just with the Chromium browser, but also with other web engines, which is great. My colleague, Alex Surkov, wrote a blog post in detail on this topic if you're interested. We also reported and fixed many bugs across desktop platforms related to Chromium UI and enhanced the Chrome history page and menu item support on Mac. Jacobo, my colleague Jacobo, wrote a blog post on this as well. We also improved support for the Shadow DOM and flat tree navigation for Caret browser navigation. Caret browser navigation, if you're not familiar with it, is what we call when you can move throughout the text in a web page, moving a tiny little cursor with the arrow keys. This is very useful if you use a screen reader because it allows you to tell the screen reader, please read this specific word to me, or this line or this paragraph, and so it's fairly important. We also imported tons of tests for accessible name calculation and did some general maintenance here as well. For Chromium on Wayland, this is a huge topic, so I'll try to explain it very briefly here. The idea is that you have to consider that in the Linux desktop, as in other desktops, we have a windowing system, but in the particular case of Linux, we have had the X windowing system in place for more than 30 years now. And that was perfectly fine when it was designed, but currently it's the X windowing system has some problems that the Wayland project is trying to overcome. The Wayland project has started about 10 years ago, more or less, maybe a little bit less. And so the idea in Igalia was to provide Chromium with native support for this other windowing system. Why was that? Because Chromium, even today, it runs on Linux natively only on the X windowing system. You can still use it on a Wayland environment, but what happens is that it will use a wrapper called X Wayland and will not run natively, which is not great, for instance, for resource-constrained devices like some embedded devices. So what we did here was to tackle this problem, but instead of just implementing Wayland support in a similar way to how X windowing system was supported, we took another layer called Ozone, which is an abstraction layer that allows you to select different backends depending on whether you want to use X, Wayland, or other windowing systems. So what we did, we started years ago on working on the Ozone Wayland backend, and we made it fully upstream in 2018 already. So once that was ready, the next step was to create another X windowing backend. X11 is the name of the protocol, so sorry about the confusion. So we created another X backend for Ozone, started working on that in the middle of 2019, and moved it to a point where much of the code is now shared between that Ozone X11 backend and the non-Ozone X11 implementation in Chromium. We reached a point where in 2020, we managed to get things in good shape, or in good enough shape, so that you can now take an official Chrome release, and just by passing a couple of runtime flags, you can actually use Ozone on Linux and decide whether you want to use X11 or Wayland platforms. And last but not least, we recently, a couple of weeks ago, activated a Finch trial for Ozone X11, which means that users are now using this system even without explicitly, some users only, even without explicitly selecting it. More things on this, we also developed along the way an extension for the Wayland drag and drop protocol, because the Wayland drag and drop protocol was not good enough for Chromium's needs. We implemented it in EXO, and we have a proposal for standardizing it upstream in Wayland protocols. So the next obvious step right now will be to have a successful Finch trial for Ozone Wayland, so that we can get users trying it as well. And once Ozone Wayland Finch trial succeeds and Ozone X11 Finch trial succeeds as well, we should be able to make Ozone the default on Linux, ideally at some point during the second half of 2021. This is a big topic, as I said. If you're interested, please check out my colleague Alex's talk at the Web Engine Hackfest, and you will have far more details on the topic. So MathML, my colleagues from the web platform team work as well on the implementation of this specification. During this period, what we did was to upstream a lot of some downstream work we did on 2019 related to it, and started to upstream support for stretch operators, which are the ones that you can see, if you see the animation above, the operators for integrals and square roots are stretch operators. And you can see in this animation how the rendering of the same formula has been changing throughout the changes that we contributed to the Chromium code base. For the JavaScript engine, V8, our compilers team implemented and shipped the JavaScript private methods proposal and improved the startup snapshot API to integrate better with Node.js. We currently working on optimizing the JavaScript public and private class fields. I have a link here to the design doc if you want to check it out. And during this period, we provided 15 patches to the V8 repository, and 2 more are currently under review. I'm not an expert on this area, so I'm sorry, but if you are interested, you are free to go to these patches and check them out, or even contact us for more information. We also started recently working on the so-called Lacrosse project, which stands for Linux and Chrome OS. So the idea here is that the Chrome OS operating system is nice, but it has a big problem, which is that the Chrome browser that runs on it right now only gets updates along with the operating system. And this is not good because usually you want to get updates for your browser much faster to fix security vulnerabilities and things like that. So the idea of this project is to decouple the Chrome browser from the operating system and have a standalone binary just for the browser that you can update. So this is an ongoing effort. We started very recently working on it. So far, we improved integration with the window manager, maximizing, minimizing, things like that, snapping windows. We added multiple display support and fractal scaling on high DPI, which is work in progress. And we also started working on a large refactoring to better split the code between the code currently on the Chrome OS directory into specific directories called ASH for operating system specific code and Lacrosse for code specific to the standalone browser that we are trying to build. And we also did some general bug fixing and improvements. And the last big project we started collaborating with is called multiple page architecture. This is very recent. We started just a few weeks ago, I think. And the idea here is that there are several use cases where you want to have multiple pages rendered in the context of just one tab. Like, for instance, if you have iframes or web view, internal web views, or if you have portals or pre-rendering, those are cases where you want to render different pages in the same tab. The problem is that right now, those different use cases use one of these 2 different approaches. Either the tab has one web contents instance with multiple pages, or the tab has multiple web contents instances with only one page each. So the idea of this project is to unify all the use cases to just use the first approach. That is, to have one web contents object with multiple pages inside of it. This is work in progress. It's a very big task. If you are interested in this topic, I recommend you to check Lucas Garani's talk at Blinkons 14 just a few days ago. And nearly at the end, we also did some work related to interoperability between browsers and web engines. In particular, we fixed the Chromium behavior to align with the specs and other browsers implementations of a couple of features. And we also migrated Chromium-specific web tests to the Web Platform Test project. What is this about? So Chromium, like other web engines, have a massive test suite of tests to make sure that it doesn't break the implementation of the web platform. So what we did here was to audit many of those tests and try to figure out which ones could be promoted, could be contributed to this other project called Web Platform Tests. And why is that? Because Web Platform Tests is used not just by Chromium, but also by Firefox and WebKit. So what this means is that we managed to migrate 240 tests that were Chromium specific. And those 240 tests are now also being run by Firefox and WebKit, which improves interoperability between browsers. We also investigated 96 tests that decided that were too Chromium specific, but still with this during this process, we managed to identify missing features and bugs that we reported to other web engines. And besides that, we also did some other contributions like protocol handlers and extensions that I cannot really go into detail here. And last but not least, not a code contribution, but I think it's an important one as well. We added 9 new Igalians during this period to work upstream on Chromium. Also added 3 new owners, which an owner is a specific kind of contributor in Chromium that is allowed to accept or reject code in specific directories that they own. And we also had a new API owner. An API owner doesn't review code. The role of the API owner is to have a say on the acceptance of changes to the Blink implementation of the web platform in Chromium. And so it's a fairly important role as well. And that's, sorry for too much information, but this is just, it's a lot of data in just a few minutes. So just to finish some statistics, I would like to share with you some numbers. So during this period, these 18 months, we landed about 3,500 patches to the Chromium repository, just to the Chromium repository. This doesn't account for V8. So as you can see, it has been a steady rate of contributions throughout the months, and it doesn't look like it's stopping anytime soon. We did all these patches they were made by 33 Igalians that landed patches in many different areas. And these numbers, by the way, doesn't account, as I say, for V8. So you have to account for 2 more people that contributed to the V8 repository only. Now trying to give a bigger context. Well, first of all, we need to be clear on that Google's contribution to Chromium project are still very big, like about 92% in total. But outside Google's contribution, we are very happy and proud to say that Igalia has been steadily, for the past few years, we have been the top non-Google contributor in number of commits. Microsoft is catching up very quickly, which makes sense because they just started using Chromium for Edge a couple of years ago, and they are closing that gap quite quickly. But it's still quite good, I think, quite good numbers. If you look not just into Chromium, but more into the Chromium ecosystem of projects, which include also V8 and WPT and WebRTC and things like that, then you can see we are still quite big, like 22% in the case of Igalia, and Microsoft, again, very big, and other contributors. In this particular case, Microsoft already surpasses in the last period, which is perfectly understandable because it's a company with way more contributors to the project. And actually, that's the reason why we are definitely not the top non-Google contributor by team size. We are, I think, 5th in the last 2 periods, but that's perfectly fine. It's not a problem. This is not a competition. This is good for diversity of the project and for the diversity, for the health of the web platform. And as you can see in the chart on the right, the truth is that diversity in the project has been also steadily increasing in the past few years, which are good news as well. Still, a lot of contributions come from Google, but if this continues going as it is right now, we will have a more diverse web platform, more diverse Chromium project in the next years. And that is all from my side. I just wanted to put this last slide to acknowledge the effort of all my colleagues that contributed to the work that I presented in this talk. And if you have any question, you have my email. You can contact me by email. You can find me on my blog as well, or in other places on the internet like Twitter and GitHub. And that is all. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you got some useful information out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario, for amazing presentation, a lot of details. Actually, Igalia is a very important part of the web community, contributing to many projects. So thank you for sharing all these details. Next talk is coming from Jose Manrique. He's working for Vitergia, and he's going to present his talk from counting potatoes to help organization understand open source software engineering. So over to you, Jose.
Listo. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this track about software engineering myth busting and the Spanish industry use cases. I would like to talk a brief introduction to Vitergia as a company and the story behind the company, because I think it's related how we started as a research group in the university and how we end having a company working for several companies. So I think this is also a motivational talk for anyone attending to the conference. Well, it's been a long road, so I will try to brief that in at least 15-20 minutes, no more than that. But I would like to, if you have any question, just please let me know and let's talk later if that's possible. So, of course, first of all, I would like to introduce the topic about what we do in Vitergia, or from the research group we come from. And we basically help companies to understand how open source is being developed. And nowadays, everybody is talking about open source and how important it is. But some time ago, it was not that well known. And at that moment, I think it's still there. Is what do most people really know about how open source is being developed? How many people is involved? How people are collaborating? How companies are collaborating? Because this is not only people in the spare time developing software. It's also competitors contributing on building things. And actually, usually the answer and the reply probably is an old meme, but nothing Jones knows is a very good question, a very good reply, sorry. And just to start by how we started this journey about Inviteria is, okay, we are coming from research, so everything started with a paper. In 2001, there was a paper, it was a technical publication showing how big was Red Hat community, how many people were involved in developing Red Hat Linux distribution. And there was Jesus, Miguel, Pedro de las Heras, and other people that were in the University of Juan Carlos doing some research about open source. They were thinking, okay, why not measuring the size of other Linux distribution? And of course, they were fans of Debian. They were and still using Debian a lot. And at that moment, Debian was in the 2.2 version that, if you don't know, basically Debian releases are named using Toy Story people and roles. So at that moment, Debian 2 was named Potato. And that's the reason, okay, let's count potatoes. How many people is using or is contributing to Debian at that moment? And honestly, the background also was about, okay, we need data to talk about things. Specifically, when we are talking about software or development, that there were a lot of things that were based on opinions and not just facts, and especially in open source that, okay, how open source is developed. It's not a company, a single company. So measuring how that things are quite different. And it was William Deming, the one that's saying without data, you are just a person with an opinion, and opinions are not bad. But when you have data to found those opinions, I think this makes stronger statements. So it was not only about measuring things, but also developing tools to allow other people to take the measures and the publications done by this research group to reproduce them. So it's also related with open science and being able to, okay, let's take the tools that we are using to measure things and allow people to measure the same things. And of course, these tools were also open source tools. And at that moment, they were called Metrics Grimoire. Grimoire is the book of enhancements for wizards. So a lot of things in Inviteria are related with wizardry and how wizards are using enhancement. For 4 years, they were developing these tools that, again, they were allowed to measure things from GitHub repositories, Jiras, Baxilas, and so many things. And it was in 2011 when Samsung Korea, from Korea, make a call, okay, I would like to have a report about the WebKit project. That is a well-known open source project. And, Apple and Google were building that technology, but there were other players involved. And Samsung was interested in participating on this project. Later, they were starting to develop a lot of web technologies and improvements on the browser. And they wanted to know, okay, we need to understand how this project was developed. And they want to pay for this. They wanted to pay for this. Okay, a company like Samsung willing to pay for a report about this to a bunch of folks in the south of Madrid doing some research about the topic. That moment where people were finishing their careers, some people were finishing the PhD in the research group. Would that be a potential thing for building a company? Would be more companies like Samsung willing to pay for this? Because again, it was Samsung Korea. It wasn't actually the results of this research were presented in Seoul for some of my colleagues. So it was interesting to see, okay, why not testing the idea of, is it a potential company for this? So, and this is one of my typical questions, where do most people think USA enterprises are born? And we all think about garages, and this is the HP garage in Silicon Valley. Actually, it's named as the birthplace of Silicon Valley, was this Hewlett and Packard started working on the oscilloscope. But, Silicon Valley, how that ended nowadays. Everybody has a garage for an entrepreneur. Well, what was Inviteria born? Well, I think we did more in a Spanish way. We found the company just meeting and discussing with some beers and with some tapas in El Rincón del Tío Eulogio. And it's also nice to know where is this. This is not it's not a cool place in the center of Madrid. It's not a terrace or a roof in the north of Madrid. It's not co-located with other startups. It's basically a bar, a small restaurant or a small tapas place in the south of Madrid, in Getafe, because most of the people that founded Bitergia were from there. And okay, we love nice places, but this is where we live, and why not setting up something close to where we live? And this is how the company started in 2012. The company was founded. These are the 6 founders of the company. And you know how cool we have that. We don't have any paper to show the name of the company. So we take the screen and put the logo there. That was the first logo from Bitergia, the owl. Again, wizards, owls, magicians. And this is how the company started in 2012. In 2013, we presented the first set of tools in FOSDEM, the largest open source conference in Europe, with around 8,000 attendees. So basically, we were there for years. So this was the first time we were presenting, okay, this is what we are willing to do as a company. This is coming from the university research. This is coming to companies that you are interested. And actually, the tools were also evolving from Metrics Grimoire to also the visualization part. And this is how it looked like for those years. Very, I would say, early prototypes of how dashboards presenting information could look like, but also was the seed for first customers. And you can see there one of the 2 first customers we have. That was the MediaWiki Foundation, the ones that are hosting the Wikipedia, and also the OpenStack project, one of the largest cloud open source projects in the world at that moment. Well, you see around 6,000 contributors and a lot of activity. And it was interesting starting with working with open source foundation like this. In 2014, we set up the first conference about, okay, why not meeting with other people that are interested in metrics around open source development? So we call this, we are not very good at naming, Bitergia. Imagine Bitergia for people talking in English. Bitergia is so easy for us in Spanish, but in English, it's a little bit different. But okay, let's call this the FLOSS Community Metrics Meeting, FLOSS for Free, Libre, Open Source Software Community Metrics Meeting. And we set up this in Portland. Why Portland and not in Madrid or, San Francisco or other cool places? Well, one of our customers was Puppet Labs. They were willing to host the conference in their own offices. So we were there for a bigger conference, that was the Open Source Conference, OSCON, from O'Reilly. So we went there a couple of days earlier. We set up this meeting, and it was interesting to meet with people from the Eclipse Foundation, from Puppet Labs, from Twitter, people that, well, okay, these are nice companies. Some of them ended up being Bitergia customers, but also with some of them, we started out doing research about how, again, this topic. And it was 2015 when, okay, we were using the same tools for years, that the tools were developed for, university research papers. But when we are willing to use this software for companies and to deploy this, they are expecting something that scale to the size of big projects, big companies, something that is easy to maintain. So a lot of people talk about legacy code. We've been living with technical debt and legacy code for years. So 2015 was the year, okay, we need to rebuild everything from scratch. Most of the software has been completed. We decided to start from scratch. Of course, taking the lessons learned from these years of research, papers, and stuff like that. And we put that into production. So in 2015, we did the first demo about Grimoire Lab. That basically was a new set of tools, also integrated with Elasticsearch, Python, Django, and other tools that were also, of course, using open source software. By 2016, we realized that there was a lot of questions and opinions about how was diversity going in open source projects. And we realized that around most of the projects, around only 20% of the contributors, the code contributors, were women. So, okay, we started doing deeper research about that. We also did some research papers, but also some industrial papers, and also collaborations with companies like Intel to do the analysis of certain projects like the Linux kernel, the OpenStack, again, community, and things like that. And other projects that also Intel was interested about. And again, this ended with nice reports and visualizations. But I think that one of the most interesting dates were September 11, 2017, when the chaos community was announced, and we were not able to announce it in advance because, again, that was presented in LA, in Los Angeles, and we were planning to go there in a flight. So saying that we were going to release chaos in September 11 in the States probably was not a very good marketing. And basically, there was the Linux Foundation. We were negotiating with them about, okay, why not setting up a community funded and hosted by the Linux Foundation to discuss about, okay, what's the community health of open source and how we can measure that. So we set up this project we were part of the founders of the Community Health Analytics for Open Source Software. That's CHAOS acronym. And we were able to put together in the same table foundations that were competing each other, like the Eclipse Foundation, the Linux Foundation, the Mozilla Foundation, OpenStack Foundation, companies like Red Hat, Bitergia, universities and research centers like from Montreal, from Nebraska, from Victoria in Canada, and people like John Bacon, well known in the open source ecosystems too. And we were able to put all these people together to discuss about this topic and set up this project. So basically, I think it was 2 or 3 years later, we released our first product, because up to now we were doing a lot of consulting. We have these open source tools, but we decided, okay, we need to put something in the market that anyone should be able to use. So we released Cauldron.io, and this was CHAOSCon. You remember Flo's community metrics meeting? We turned that into CHAOSCon, and this was the CHAOSCon Europe 2020. Now we are having CHAOSCon Europe, CHAOSCon North America, that basically are collocated with other big conferences like FOSDEM and the Open Source Summit. FOSDEM in Europe, Open Source Summit North America in North America. Next one is going to be by the end of August, I think by the end of September in Seattle, if we are allowed to travel. So let's cross fingers and let's see how things are going to be by then. And this is where Cauldron was presented. Cauldron is basically a tool that you go there, you can extract information and data for things like, again, Git, GitHub, GitLab, Meetup, Stack Overflow, other forks like Genome, GitLab, or KDE, GitLab. We are adding probably new data sources soon. And you create reports that you can get information, again, about the projects or the ecosystems that matter to you, because you are a project manager, a community manager, an analyst that we are willing to do. Of course, this is everything free open source software, but also it is working as a SaaS solution, so you can try that for free. By December 2020, the Linux Foundation itself forked Grimoire Lab, because that was our contribution to the Chaos project. We contributed the code, and they hosted it. Basically, they forked it to integrate in their own analytics too. So the Linux Foundation released in December the Linux Foundation X Insights. So basically, this is a tool they are using to measure the health of around close to 100 projects they are hosting, things from the Chaos, of course, community, but also Kubernetes or Cloud Native Foundation activities, the Automotive Grade Linux projects, Academic Software Foundation. Academic Software Foundation is coming from projects that the Hollywood Academy and projects are already with field makers are also releasing open source, so they have data about how these things are being contributed. And not later than that, I think it was April 2021, we released Cauldron Cloud. We call that Cloud, Cauldron.io. That's actually our first product that people can pay for. As I said before, we have been doing a lot of consulting, working with several companies, but this is something that basically anyone through a website can go there and start using and getting information about, again, the projects that matter to them. And you see that from 2011 to 2021 is almost 10 years to build something from scratch to just a product that people are starting to use from different companies like Redis, and the other one is Mattermost are also using this. Red Hat is also using this for their open source program office. So this is interesting, and let's see. I don't know what's going to be in the future. But I would say this is definitely a long trip. I think the red spots are places I've been as Bitergian, as working in Bitergia. So you see Okay, I think there is a big part of Asia that I don't know yet, and probably a big part of South America and the center of the United States. I don't know yet, and Africa, of course. But these are places that probably could be well known in the next years, because there is a lot of open source activity happening in Africa, for example, and they are hosting some conferences. Because actually, this is our approach to the market, how we ended doing business. And I think this is an important lesson to learn. In our case, a lot of business has come from going to conferences, explaining to the people, the users we are solving, how we are using metrics and insights to help organizations to manage their open source projects and to understand how they are related with several open source communities and how that can improve the software development management, but also the talent and the talent management, attraction, retention, things like that. Things related with legacy and security and issues. I'm not going to talk about some vulnerabilities around source code, because we don't do source code analysis, but if you can see how some areas of the project are not active anymore, so they are, let's say, not well seen, or not people are not taking all the eyes there, so they have potential breaches that people can use. So again, we have measures to provide information about that, and this also means to know a lot of people. Again, these are probably a good collection of people we have worked for or worked with, and probably some of them are familiar to you. Probably there are not that big companies like Midokura and Jinjar. I don't know if you know them, but probably you already know people like Banco Santander, or companies like the Eclipse Foundation like that, or Red Hat, or HashiCorp. And they all are related with open source in very different ways. So basically, this is the way we have provided them information that I think is critical for many reasons. Again, because they want to attract talent, because they want to retain the talent they have from their own projects, but also for the community, because that's also key for, again, sustainability of open source development at some point. And okay, you can have from, I don't know, let's name one, Uber. They were releasing a lot of open source projects, and you might be thinking, okay, what's the Uber doing in open source? And of course, when we are talking about open source, it's also a seed for digital transformation in some companies, because it's a way, okay, my business is to put more people to point A to point B, or to release packages to a certain customer. But for doing all that, I'm using technology, and that technology, I can release that on an open source project that people can contribute. From that contribution, I can improve my technology, but I can also attract talent to my own company. So again, there are very different strategies to use open source, and how measures of that contributions and how the code review process is going, how the release management are going is important for these companies. So just to finish, a quick view of what we do in Bitergia. Again, we make people understand how the software that matters to them is being built. And I think that was all for me. I think I am under the 25 minutes. So I think that's okay.
Okay, now unmute. Thank you, Manrique, for your presentation. Remember that we will have a panel with the speaker later today, 9:05 Central European Time. So stay with us a little bit more to know the discussion with the speaker in our panel. Next talk is from Pablo Moncada. He's going to present about the challenge of building a telco in the cloud.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here in this event with you. My name is Pablo. I'm a software engineer at MásMóvil, which is a telco from Spain. And I'm here to talk about the challenges of building a telco in the cloud. Here you have my Twitter account if you want to follow me. So let's go to it. So first of all, a little bit about MásMóvil. What is MásMóvil? MásMóvil is a telco company in Spain. We give access and internet connectivity, telephone connectivity to more than 11 million clients in Spain, and there's not only one brand, which is MásMóvil. MásMóvil was the first one that arrived to Spain in 2005, and MásMóvil has been growing a lot, getting new clients and also acquiring new companies like the ones that you see in here, like Pepephone, Yoigo, Yamaya, Lebara. Lebara in Spain, because there's other Lebara in other parts of Europe, but Lebara in Spain, it's part of MásMóvil Group since 1 year ago, more or less. So what's the challenge in here? There's been an exponential growing up of millions of clients in the MásMóvil Group, and acquiring new companies implies that we have to integrate their information systems. This is not an easy task. Coming from telco companies, most of them have their systems in multiple data centers. They're not hosted in the cloud. So we had to integrate their data centers into our data centers. And we ended up with lots of data centers. Last year, we had 9 data centers in Madrid, and we wanted to keep only 2 of them. So this project comes with a big digital transformation project itself. We need to handle in a simpler way how we operate our systems, we need to be able to scale our systems, and we need to convert MásMóvil as a traditional telecom company, and we need to become a software and development company. We needed to do it with speed. So this is, many people talk about digital transformation in the companies. All companies in the world are being digital transformed. What it means to us, it means to create or be able to be a software company, okay, a software-based company, and be able to own our system. We need to create the systems by our own and be able to know how they work. And this is quite an important aspect, and we need to focus on the client, be customer-centric, and all must go through the customer experience. So in order to continuously improve, we need to understand what do our clients need, right? And they must be our most important focus. We need to be able in this path to observe and develop and adapt to all the demands of our clients in time. We need to go with all the speed that it's been demanded. So to do this, we need to build a development team that understands our business, that has ownership, and it's capable of pushing to production new functionalities in a constant way. This is what we say. It means that the development teams should own the infrastructure. We have this concept that development teams and infrastructure teams are separate, but in the way that we see these things, the development team should own the infrastructure. And why is this important? We need to take into account several aspects when we push new functionalities or we develop new systems and we want to put them in production. Some aspects like security, the deployment management, the cost, where do we store the logs? There are many factors we have to take into account about this. Some of them are legal, some of them are development aspects. How are we going to monitor the application? How are we going to handle high availability? Is our application going to be resilient? What does resiliency mean? For example, simple case, if our application that is a web application, it stops working, is it gonna work again by itself, or someone has to go to restart the server? So is our application resilient? Is our application be able to scale constant in the time, to scale in a specific moment? How can we handle different environments, the development environment, the staging environments, production environments? And also important, how are we going to be able to handle the backups and our disaster recovery plan? So putting a system in production seems easy, seems like you have already finished developing your software and you can put it into production, but there are lots of factors that we have to take into account. How does a development workflow for putting something in production looks like? Here on the left, we have a traditional workflow that we have team that needs to take care of the requirements, another team, specific team for developing these requirements, different team that once the development is finished, they build an artifact to put into production, another different team that after that test the solution, and after all the testing is done, they put this solution into production. They deploy the solution into the production servers, and this is handled by a different team also. And then after this, a team that is completely different to all these ones that we have mentioned before, takes care of the monitorization and take care of the incidents that make happen during the life cycle of our application. So this traditional workflow, every team has its separate role. They don't know from each other, and it's hard to go in a fast way. On second hand, we have this DevOps culture workflow where a single team is able to do all the steps that are required to put software into production, from defining the requirements to building and monetization. So the whole team is responsible for the whole life cycle of the application. What is DevOps for us in MassMobile? DevOps can be understood in many different ways. What we understand of DevOps, it means reduced multidisciplinary teams. This means that a team is able to manage, to own the product that is developing, from defining all the requirements and deploying and monitoring the application, following a methodology, improving continuously, and having in mind always that we need to know how our application is responding, taking metrics and observability into account. This together with a toolchain and a technology radar. This toolchain consists of several tools that we use together with this methodology and these multidisciplinary teams, like Jenkins for our CI platform, Terraform for infrastructure as code, Kubernetes, Google Cloud Platform, and Istio for containers and observability orchestration, Prometheus for monitoring our applications, or IDE like Visual Studio Code or IntelliJ, Slack, GitHub for communication and collaboration tools, and Vertex or Go as the default languages for developing our applications, or MongoDB or Postgres as our database solutions. And how do we build this radar? What is this technology radar? This technology radar has already been introduced by ThoughtWorks, and they categorize frameworks, infrastructure languages, or data management by different sectors, and categorizing them by you should adopt it, you should do an assessment, you should try it, or you should hold. The technologies in the center of this radar are the ones that you should prefer to use, and the ones that are not in the radar you shouldn't use. So ThoughtWorks introduced their technology radar, and other companies like Zalando also implemented their own technology radar. So in here we can see this technology radar implemented by Zalando, which is very interesting, by the way. They have open sourced this interface, and you could create your own technology radar if you want. So how do we define our own technology radar in MassMobile? We take into account some variables like, is it an open source technology? Is it going to introduce us some vendor lock-in? Is it focused to be cloud native? How are we going to operate it? And how much is it going to cost us? This is some of the variables we take into account when creating our technology radar. So what it means that if a new application has to be developed, this application needs to follow the technology radar that has already been defined in Mass Mobile. And well, this is a great tweet that talks itself about why are we using cloud in Mass Mobile. They say that at Netflix, Andrew Montanelli said, at Netflix we have hundreds of microservices and thousands of daily deployment to production every day. Tens of thousands VMs, hundreds of thousands customer interactions, millions and billions times serial migrates. They do this on top of tens of operation engineers and no data centers. So all this that I've been talking to you, how do we develop our software? How do we do it customer-centric? How do we do it in a way that we can scale? How do we make the development teams own the infrastructure? It's only possible if we operate in the cloud. And this is what they did in Netflix, and Netflix, it's completely running on top of AWS. So if a company like Netflix is capable of doing it, so why can't telcos do it? Okay, what do we have as Mass Mobile? In Mass Mobile, we are running around 10,000 pods with around 2,000 services. This could be translated like 10,000 virtual services or virtual servers in data centers that right now they should be like 3,000 virtual CPUs, 10 terabytes of RAM. We are doing this with around 100 development engineers and just 5 platform engineers, and all this in GCP, in the cloud. And this is possible because of the capabilities that the cloud brings to us. And this way, we can offer all this infrastructure to the teams. They can define the requirements, they can develop, they can iterate, they can monitor, they can deploy into production again and again. And they can be independent teams, one of each other. So let's try to understand how does the stack in Mass Mobile looks like. It's quite convenient for us how we name it. We are Mass Mobile, this is our stack, so we name it Mass Stack. So it's pretty convenient. In here, we see different black boxes like billing, credentials, customers. Each of them represent a product or a functionality in the cloud. Each of them, it's a different development team or a squad that it's composed by backend engineers, front-end engineers, etc., etc. They are completely independent one to each other. And these teams follow the same rules that we have defined before, and they take care of our technology radar. Our squads are, the size of their squads are between 5 or 7 people, no more, okay? And we have it separated in 2 parts. The part that is BSS in telco and OSS. As you can see in our technology radar, one of the variables we take into account is how we operate our systems and how do we have some vendor lock-in. So going to the cloud doesn't mean having vendor lock-in with one of the vendors. And this is why we've chosen many of these open source solutions like Kafka, Cadence, or Airflow. If there is a managed solution in the cloud, we will go for it. We don't want to spend our efforts in maintaining databases or Kafka clusters. But if this solution is managed by someone and it's an open source solution, that's a solution that that we are using. We are using Kubernetes for all management of containers that we are deploying to our systems, or these black boxes are composed by several microservices, which are several pods that are all orchestrated by Kubernetes. And Kubernetes help us in taking all the things that we mentioned before into account, all the deployment, the scaling, the resiliency, the high availability, the logs, the monitoring. They solve us all these operational problems. We are using also Istio for our security and observability challenges. In case of observability, when we have such a complex system that this one that I'm presenting to you, or other systems that other companies may have, it's quite important to be able to know what is happening at any point of the systems. And these are the golden metrics, or the three metrics that have been defined by other companies like Google and they are perfectly described in the SRE book, that they said that you have to be able to monitor the request, how many requests are you receiving at any point of your system, how many errors are being happening, and what's the latency between two of your systems. So if you are able to measure these three metrics in any point of your system, 90% of the work it's done. This is done directly and automatically by implementing Istio service mesh. I mentioned it before, we are relying on open source solutions, not only because they are open source, they are free. It means more than that. It means that we know how they work. We know how our system should work with this solution. And it means we can understand and know how to solve any kind of problem that could happen in the future, because we deeply understand how this solution works. So to sum up, in our journey to the cloud, we realized that the development team should own the infrastructure. There are many possible solutions. Define your rules. For example, a technology radar, it's a good starting point. All the clouds have pros and have cons. Consider using any of them and avoid a full vendor lock-in. It's impossible to say that you're not going to have vendor lock-in even if you're using Kubernetes, but try to avoid a full vendor lock-in if possible. Be able to observe and measure at any point of your infrastructure, as already told you with this SRE example. Going to the cloud, it's more than creating virtual machines in somewhere you know that it's gonna scale endlessly. It means developing in a different way, developing in a cloud native way. So I hope you can understand a little bit how we are doing in our journey to the cloud. And I'm happy to answer any kind of question. You can reach me on Twitter, LinkedIn. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pablo, for this interesting presentation. It's great to know how a company like Grupo Másmóvil select their technological stack. So we will have the chance to know more in the speaker panel. So next talk is the presentation from Rafael Marin, about cybersecurity and interoperability for IoT constrained network in smart agriculture.
Hello, I'm Rafael Marin Perez, Director of Research and Innovation in Odin Solution. Odin is a ICT SME with a high experience in research and innovative solutions applied to different industrial sectors like smart cities, energy efficient buildings, and precision agriculture. Today, I'm going to present our research work about cybersecurity and interoperability for IoT constrained network in a smart agriculture sector. This is the outline of the presentation. I will introduce the work. The Internet of Things IoT provides many great possibilities, but there are new challenges. For example, connectivity for constrained IoT devices is still one of the most important problems. Currently, low power wide area networks are intending to fill this gap. These LPWAN networks focus on low range and low power communication for IoT devices powered by small batteries. These technologies enable massive deployment of low-cost devices with low data transmission rates. IoT is based on the connectivity between heterogeneous devices through internet. To enable this connectivity, it is required to use internet protocols like IPv6 that supports massive connectivity. However, IPv6 headers are too large for LPWAN network with small packets, for instance, less than 100 bytes. Moreover, security is another important challenge for LPWAN networks. Traditional security protocols used on Internet require large headers and high computing capacities. These security protocols do not adapt well to the limitation of IoT devices with low computing capacities, low power wireless communication with a small packet size. For this reason, security mechanisms in LPWAN network are typically vendor-specific. So the direct interconnection between different LPWAN devices is very complex. The direct interoperability is still one of the gaps for the research community. Considering the previous problems, here we can see the main contribution of this work. First, we analyze the state of the art regarding cybersecurity and interoperability in LPWAN networks. Next, we will collect a set of requirements from the smart agriculture sector. Finally, we present a novel solution to enable cybersecurity and interoperability, especially authentication and key management in LPWAN networks. Let's go through the related work. There is a lot of interest in the interoperability and security in IoT. This is needed to easily managing large deployment composed of different technologies. IoT considers the Internet protocols and standards as key points to achieve this. Moreover, LPWAN network require novel mechanisms and protocols adapted to their limitation. There are different efforts done by standardization bodies to solve these issues. The Internet Engineering Task Force, ITF, created the LPWAN work group to integrate LPWAN technologies and Internet. Their most sophisticated result is static context header compression, also known as STIC. This is a mechanism that enables the transmission of IPv6 and UDP packets over LPWAN technologies. There are different works in the literature that support STIC as a good solution for LoRaWAN networks, for example. That will be commented later. To avoid the vendor-specific security management in LPWAN, during security, different security technologies have been adopted. AAA architecture are key to provide authentication authorization during the initial connection of IoT devices. There are currently standardization efforts to integrate AAA infrastructure like radius and diameter with LPWAN. Also, the Open Mobile Alliance and ITF propose the use of OSCORE protocol to enable secure data chain at the application level. Also, the ATF is developing lightweight key exchange technologies such as EDOC. Next, we analyze the smart agriculture industry and its application requirements. Smart agriculture is a great example of the application for LPWAN networks. LPWAN network enable information collection and control operation like irrigation and pest management. Especially in agriculture fields, there are different deployments of LPWAN network due to the lack of traditional cellular communication like 3G or 4G. Moreover, we need to consider a specific aspect of the smart agriculture scenarios. Most market-ready solutions cover a specific task and employ vendor-specific protocols. Typical scenarios include different devices that cannot communicate with each other. Also, agricultural locations lack power grids and cellular coverage. In this case, technologies that focus on large coverage and low power are essential. And finally, there are many types of devices without common security protocols. Our proposal is to address all these problems of the agriculture sector. First, we would like to introduce the building blocks. One of the most relevant LPWAN technology is LoRaWAN. LoRaWAN has received great attention from both academy and industry. It is supported by the LoRa Alliance, which is a consortium of large companies including Semtech and Cisco. LoRaWAN is divided into two layers. The MAC layer on top has a specific protocol for security and interoperability, and the physical layer employs a low-power, long-range technology called LoRa. LoRaWAN provides specific security management and techniques for authentication, key management, and data encryption at the network level. However, their protocols and security mechanisms are not compatible with other LPWAN networks. For this reason, we will propose an alternative solution for security and interoperability at the application layer over any LPWAN technology like LoRaWAN. First, our proposal is based on low overhead CoAP EAP protocol, which is an ongoing standardization effort by IETF. It provides lightweight bootstrapping process for authentication, authorization, and key management. It enables a security solution at application layer without depending on wireless network technology. Also, it was designed for constrained IoT devices and low-power networks from the very beginning. It supports to transport any security EAP method over constrained application protocol CoAP. CoAP is a very popular protocol in IoT deployment. It's similar to MQTT and HTTP, but for constrained devices. STIC is a novel mechanism to compress IPv6, UDP, and CoAP header. STIC enables that LPWAN device can directly communicate through Internet using these standardized protocols. It is quite efficient and was designed for the specific feature of the LPWAN technologies such as star topology and small packets. It is based on a static context of IoT connectivity and safe bandwidth by removing synchronization. Moreover, STIC includes a fragmentation mechanism to support the maximum size of IPv6 packet. After presenting the building block, we move into our proposal architecture. Our proposal solution is based on the integration of STIC and low CoAP EAP. This combination enables security authentication, authorization, and key management over Internet protocol through constrained LPWAN network, like LoRaWAN. The improvement of this solution are first the interoperability for authentication and key management through standardized Internet protocols, and also a low protocol overhead that can be transmitted through LPWAN network with small packets. Here we can see the overall architecture of the solution. IoT devices connected to LPWAN network have to be authenticated for key generation before establishing a secure end-to-end communication for data exchange with a cloud service or other IoT device. To do that, IoT devices must implement both STIC and CoAP EAP in order to authenticate through the IoT controller. These devices are considered constrained. They employ microcontrollers with low computing capacity. LoRaWAN gateways communicate with the IoT devices through the LoRa physical layer. These gateways transparently forward all the received packets to the network server. The network server and application server are part of the LoRaWAN backend. The network server manages the ready parameters of each IoT device to guarantee a reliable wireless link. Also, it represents the center of the star topology, since there is only one network server in each LoRaWAN deployment. The application server exposes a socket that behaves like a communication pipeline between the cloud server and the IoT device. In our proposal, the application server implements the stick adaptation server. However, the network administrator can relocate this stick adaptation layer to an external proxy agent in the cloud server. So our proposal does not require any change to the LoRaWAN backend in order to work properly. The IoT controller is addressed by the IoT device to perform the bootstrapping process. The IoT controller decodes the local IAP protocols and encapsulates the data payload in a new AAA protocol like Radius to communicate with the AAA server. AAA server is the endpoint of the EAP authentication and contains the authentication credential of each IoT device, and this credential must be verified before the key establishment. These figures show the complete protocol stack. The LoRaWAN network guarantees that the message reaches the application server. The stick decompresses and reassembles the original message from IoT devices before sending it through Internet via IPv6, UDP, and CoAP packets. Therefore, the IoT controller does not need to implement any of the stick mechanisms. The upper protocol layers focus on the exchange between the IoT device and the IoT controller using the bootstrapping process local EAP. In this figure, we focus on the upper layers over the CoAP protocol. The AAA server has been left out for simplicity, since the no-constraints AAA exchange is outside of this work. It is based on well-known Internet standard as Radius. The following diagram shows the local EAP exchange between the IoT device and the IoT controller. We can see a description of each packet contents. Please note that different EAP authentication methods can be employed in this proposal. This will change the total number of the packets needed for the bootstrapping process. There are a few relevant considerations in this exchange. The first message is the only one that the IoT device sends as a CoAP client to initialize the authentication process, while during the rest of the exchange, the IoT controller is the CoAP client in charge of the authentication process. This is to simplify the protocol implementation in the IoT device. Because CoAP server in the IoT device is stainless, and this means that it does not manage retransmission or timers. The following steps are required to send the request and response message. In our particular scenario, we choose the EAP presearch key method, which requires low computation. In order to validate our proposal, we analyze the results, message size, and overhead. The low CoAP EAP already does a great job at keeping packets small, while using EAP presearch key method keeps the necessary number of packets low, but also applying a stick scheme makes message even smaller. In this slide, we give a brief description of the stick compression. All the IPv6 UDP headers are compressed to zero because we know beforehand the addresses and the UDP ports of both source and destination hosts. Regarding COAP fields, there are, they are all compressed except the COAP authentication option, the lowest 8 bits of the message ID, and the last 32 bits of the no ones field. This package shows the before and after compression results. Each row represents one of the 7 packets of AP process. We saw the result in terms of packet size and also the minimum configuration of the LoRaWAN data rate needed. The IPv6 column shows the original IPv6 message size in bytes, while the stick column presents the packet size after the compression. In the last column, we include a minimum LoRaWAN rate to send the packet without fragmentation. The table shows a clear trend on the improvement of the message length and the data rate required. In all instances, the message can be transmitted in a better coverage mode. Our main goal for the beginning was to introduce the bandwidth needed to perform the authentication and key exchange. This result demonstrates that the proposed combination of the local IAP and stick is a highly efficient solution adapted for constrained LPWAN networks. Finally, we present the conclusion. Mainly, IoT technologies, especially LPWAN, are enabling improvement in smart agriculture business sector. However, a secure bootstrapping process is fundamental to manage large deployment with different types of devices. There are many technologies on internet that address this bootstrapping problem, but none one of them consider the severe bandwidth limitation of the LPWAN technologies. In this work, we have presented a combination of low CoAP and stick to provide lightweight bootstrapping process and header compression adapted to the LPWAN limitation and based on internet standards like IPv6, UDP, and CoAP. We have validated our solution over a LoRaWAN network, which is one of the most spread LPWAN technology. The results show that the proposal provides a highly flexibility and efficient bootstrapping solution that can be employed over any LPWAN technology. In the future, we will perform experiments using different configurations to study the energy efficiency of our solution. Moreover, we plan to integrate the ITF standard, so-called SCORE, that leverage the key establishment in the bootstrapping process in order to keep a secure end-to-end data protection at the application layer without depending on the LPWAN technology. Additionally, new research will be conducted in the compression of EAP header through the stick technique. Thanks all for your attention.
Thank you, Rafael, for this presentation. It's very interesting to see what is the, I would say, the complexity of even this constrained network to solve a requirement in agriculture. Thank you for your presentation. The next talk is very special one for a couple of reasons. Is a new talk. It was there was a very last minute change in the agenda because some problem with the initial planned presentation. The actual one is going to be Professor Juan Quemada from the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, presenting about technology transfer experience. It's going to be an interview approach in the format. So yeah, but thank you, Juan, for this presentation, and it's over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for your time. My name is Victor Sanchez. I am the CEO at Matchme.io and also part of the organizing committee at the Spanish Industry Case Studies track for ICSE 2021. Today with me, I have the pleasure of having Juan Quemada, which is not also a friend, not only a friend, sorry, but also has been my teacher as a full professor at UPM in the Telecomunicaciones School in Madrid. He has been also the leader of my R&D laboratory, the group of Next Generation Internet, the group of Internet de Nueva Generación at UPM itself. And he's also a partner on our company, on Matchme.io, which is a spin-off of UPM. So he's probably the best person possible to talk about technology transfer experiences, which is the name of this track. First of all, Juan, let me tell you hello and thank you for your time. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Well, thank you very much, Victor, for this very, very nice introduction and also for the invitation to speak here, because software engineering, I think, is something which must be promoted because it's one of the key enablers of the future.
Absolutely, no, and thank you, Juan, for dedicating some time. I know that we have limited time today, and I have plenty of questions for you. So if you don't mind me, I'm going to get started directly with the first one. So Juan, I know over the years at UPM, right, you have supervised laboratories, public and semi-public research projects. You have done MOOCs, hackathons, spin-offs, and you have done all of that at the same time while having all your responsibilities as a teacher absolutely fulfilled, right, on that aspect. So my first question to you, I have to ask you, why is technology transfer so important? Why is it so important from a personal point of view for you? You almost have dedicated your life to it. So what is it for you that makes that technology transfer so important?
Yes, I mean, I ask it to myself also, but I think this is because I finished my studies in the 70s when the hippies were around. It's a very, very old time. I think you were not nearly born, but the technology was starting to change the world. The digital revolution was starting then, and I got so impressed. I was following what was happening in the US, and I got so impressed of how technology could introduce changes in economics, in society, everywhere, that I think this impacted me so strongly that I have devoted all my professional life to change the world with technology as much as I can.
And I think that's actually a very important question, right? So much. Sometimes timing really matters, right? On that piece. And you mentioned another aspect, right? On that, and it was when you were relatively young, right? That first moment of connecting with technology. I think that happens to many of us, right? We can go back to very early on our lives as the moment that we decided to start with technology. And actually, my second question is precisely about that early contact. So obviously, early contact of young students with STEM, right? With science, technology, engineering, math. And that talent development, it's very critical in that afterward technology transfer that will eventually happen. So technology transfer starts with talent, starts with the skills, starts with knowledge, and I would say a safer space, right, on where you can practice all of those skills on that aspect. So I have to ask you, right, what type of initiatives do you run that drive those talents especially in early students, maybe even before the university? Can you give us a little bit of your perspective on how talent is guarded?
Well, I think that today you have to expose kids as early as possible to technology and to programming, especially. Programming is speaking to the computer, speaking to the machine somehow. And so it's very important that they learn to speak with machines as they speak with persons at the same time. I think this will have a very much large amount of benefits. Well, I must say that I am mainly involved in exposing students to STEM at the university, but I have been working in hackathons for kids, and I was absolutely impressed how receptive they were, how many things they did. And I have had also, for example, with my online courses, with my MOOCs, my massive online courses, where students in the first year of the telecommunication engineering in Madrid had done my MOOCs, told me, Professor, I made your MOOC 5 years ago or 3 years ago, and I was
they
really
were teenagers,
impressed.
right? I mean, they were teenagers when they were doing that. That's crazy.
Yeah. So I think it's very important, and we must promote it. Also, not sufficient attention is given to it.
I want to catch you up on something that you mentioned, right? Which were the hackathons, right? And I know that we worked together on some of those. You mentioned GDG Kids, right? Where it was, and again other initiatives with little kids that have been doing that. But you are also one of the co-founders of one of my favorite events in Spain and in Europe, probably, which is Hack for Good, right? So can you tell me a little bit about first those experiences with kids, and then a little bit more on how it's Hack for Good and how it's kind of putting that seed on technology transfer?
Well, I have had just a couple of experiences in projects with some companies in Spain to perform some hackathons with kids. And well, they were really nice. I mean, I was really impressed how kids get engaged in solving objectives, finding solutions to the educations, to their schools, and to whatever. No, really, I mean, I think this is a very, very lovely activity. Well, I must say that, well, I started hackathons with you. You know it very well. I learned a lot about hackathons when you came from the US to Madrid, came back. And we have, I think we were the first to do hackathons at UPM, probably, and probably in the whole Spain, because it was more than 10 years ago when this was mainly done in the US. And well, among the hackathons, also my favorite one is Hack for Good. Hack for Good was a really nice idea, a very, very large collaborative event. We created together also with Telefonica and with another enterprises in Madrid, which was very, very collaborative, was focused in the solution of social problems, and where we introduced something which I think is extremely interesting, which is the multidisciplinary approach to a hackathon, which is not very common, because most hackathons put hackers to work together and provide a programming solution, but we joined designers, graphical designers, with entrepreneurs, with programmers, with many kind of people, with problem experts, which knew what, and all this really created one of the most marvelous events, I think, which can be created and which I have participated in, which is Hack for Good, which has now had 7 editions. Due to the pandemics, it had to be cut in the last years, but I hope that next year we will have for sure a new edition.
I definitely share that hope. I wanted, before we jump kind of to the next category, and again, I have limited time, so I'm going to try to be disciplined with our script. But something that is fascinating to me, right, about the hackathon is that I have seen people from the hackathons that then ended up in your laboratories, ended up in your research projects. So you have been scouting on those hackathons. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I must confess that the students which have gone to our projects and participated in our projects, the best ones were the ones who have participated in hackathons. I mean, the best members of the team came out of hackathons, and this is something, and it is not only because they were selected, it's also because the hackathon put a seed in them which developed a different attitude towards technology transfer, towards technology development, towards programming, towards problem solving, which is extremely important as a transversal skill, I think, in every engineer and in every technology involved person.
Why do you think that seed happened on those hackathons? What is different? What happened on a hackathon that wouldn't happen in a classical laboratory because we have practical labs on Teleco and in many other studies in Spain. So what is it different from the hackathon environment that is not happening on the labs? And do you think that the labs, that those classes could learn something from that hackathon approach?
Oh, yes, absolutely. They could learn and complement. In fact, I think that especially Hack for Good, because Hack for Good is a hackathon which is extremely rich, starts with team forming. And so people, I mean, the participants have first to build a team, engage in a team, find their position in the team. And team building is something which is not learned in the university, except for very, very special labs, which are very rare. And this is one thing. Also, the multidisciplinary approach. This is not happening in the university. I mean, you don't have multidisciplinary projects. And in Hack for Good, for example, we mix the designers, graphical designers, with problem solvers, with hackers, with programmers, with software engineers. And this gave a marvelous mix. I mean, the mix was much more than the addition of the individual person. And so I think that the hackathons and related activities should be a standard educational or learning activity in the universities.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. That's definitely very insightful, that view as a hackathon organizer and as a teacher. I think that mixture makes you very, very special on that view. Thank you for that, Juan. So following that tree, right, obviously the next step is knowledge, right? You have to be skillful in order to provide proper technology transfer. And I know that you are very proud of your MOOCs, of your massive online courses. And you were telling me, I remember a conversation a few years back, that you have had more students in 1 year of MOOC than in all of your career you have had the students sitting in your classes, right? Which is very impressive. And I'm sure but I have seen, from young people approaching you on the street to Telefonica employees when we were in the offices telling you that they were having, as managers, they were doing your MOOCs as a way to connect. So how did you got started with that? And what is it about MOOCs that made, that made them work for everything from young students to Telefonica managers, right? Tell us a little bit on how you got involved. What do you do? Which ones are the ones that you are the most proud of?
Well, I must say that I got the challenge of developing a MOOC about 9 years ago, because I got the compromise with, Red.es, Telefonica, Miriadax, and several companies to develop a MOOC on something we were teaching at a new course we had created for the new Bologna plan, which was basically design of web apps, which HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I got thinking it would be much easier than it finally was. So I got the compromise, decided to do it. And then I found that it was a really much more challenging activity than I had expected. So I worked very hard with several colleagues together. We worked very hard in the group. We started in the spring to develop the MOOC. We planned to start it early September. We couldn't, because this was a huge amount of work. We had to redo our complete way of teaching and of explaining the discourse we were using in teaching the different technologies. But finally, we succeeded. We got a quite reasonable MOOC, which started in November, I think. The result was so over our expectations. I mean, 15,000 people, got registered.
Wow.
12,500 started and 2,500 finished. Around 20% of the people. And it was a course, quite we could say demanding course, where they had to do a lot of activities. I mean, more than 70 activities. And those 2,500 people had finished the 100% of the activities. So I got extremely impressed about this. This was much more people, like you said. And that
was year one, right?
That was the first edition only.
Wow.
Since
Incredible.
then, we have had 12 editions, and over 200,000 people registered. I mean, it's really a huge amount of people. And this is probably the activity which has had much impact in terms of outreach to people I have made in my life. And on the other hand, it also changed my vision of what learning and education should be. And I started very intensively to develop new versions of the new MOOCs, also new educational methodologies for supporting it better. And I must say that this has changed completely the way I see what the learning process is. I mean, I think that videos and the multimedia technology will change the world of education of the 21st century, and universities will be strongly impacted by the new media and must change very, very much. They still work on the old way, and this must be changed.
I think you are absolutely right. And it's funny because probably the world will remember the pandemic as the trigger for video. But the reality is that this started way many years back, right? Way before even the pandemic was something that we spoke. But I think you are right. I think you are absolutely right. And it's funny because, I mean, I would like to interview you only on MOOCs because I know that you have changed a lot, right, on the engagement experiences. But I have plenty of questions, and technology transfer is so big. I'm gonna go with my next one, if you don't mind. And is I have been looking again for preparing for this interview, right? I have been looking to the Grupo de Internet de Nueva Generación, your lab at UPM. And I was so surprised to see how many open source projects you have in GitHub, and how many universities, companies, open source project, and community are basically giving more and more and more to those codes. So it's much more than your students or yourself could ever do, right? On that aspect. So tell me a little bit about what role does community play in technology transfer, and what formulas does your lab and you use on those labs to be so successful with that engagement?
Well, when I was very young, at the beginning, like most people thought there, I thought that commercial software was the key to make good technological development, because if not, they would not develop a company afterwards, no, or some commercial enterprise. But soon I discovered free software, and I discovered that it was the only cost-effective way to make huge projects, huge software projects, because software needs huge projects if they want to be relevant. And so the only way of having the feasibility, the economical feasibility of developing it is by a community, because you have so many people providing new parts of your software for free, and because in a win-win strategy they also benefit. I think the community is fundamental. So from a very early stage, I decided to go to the best techniques for developing software in the free software world. We are absolute lovers of Git and GitHub and all the open software portals, not only GitHub, there are more. And so now it is a standard in my group since many years ago that all the projects have to be developed with a professional software engineering technology. They have to have a very, very strict revision standards, and they have to be published in GitHub. I think we have published quite significant projects in GitHub. For example, one I'm very proud of is Link Here, Like Code. You know it very well, because this is an effort of many, many years. It started very, very early with a commercial project, but we decided later to transform it into an open software project. It was a very, very wise decision, and it was the only way to really consolidate a software which has had quite a good impact in the world, I would say, because there are many spin-offs in California, in the Silicon Valley, and all over the world which are using it.
No, and it's very impressive, and I love that how you relate the open sourcing software also as a bar, right, as a high standard, because if you want people to use them, right, and people to collaborate on it, you have to the quality of that code and the quality of that technology really needs to be both self-explanatory, right, and needs to be able to put it out there for people to be able to use it in a professional environment. So I love how you basically, yes, you give a lot to the community, but also the community is your high standard. I love that concept, and I think it's pretty unique and very very insightful. You mentioned, right, related obviously to this piece, your research projects have become that kind of way of evolving with the community. So research projects are obviously a vital part, I would say, of any university. And I know you have been involved in many throughout your career. I know that you do not like to brag about it, but you sent the first email from Spain. You gave the first video conferencing system in EU, which is Isabel, probably, the grandpa of LICO and of my own company, actually, on that piece. So I know that the Isabel project mattered quite a bit. You have met a lot of people that is today as an organizer of ICSE in projects like Morpheo. So tell me a little bit on your research projects, a little bit on the story. What projects kind of changed, right, your life, and what were kind of the better contributions that came out of your research projects in terms of technology transfer?
Well, I started very early with technological projects. I got into a group and into a research group when I finished my studies, which was very technology oriented, technology transfer oriented. And so from the beginning, I started doing it. I mean, something you don't know probably is I started working in electroencephalography, in the transmission of electroencephalographs via telephone line. Then I changed to protocols. Then this is the time when I made what you said is the first email, which is not really the first email. I set up the first server for which was connected to the internet email, or the ARPANET email, no, which was now when it was done, the ARPANET was changing to the internet. And I have changed, so I have to work also in computer networks, in data communications, in collaboration, synchronous and asynchronous video conferencing, the web platform, in many things. All the times I have tried to do technological developments which have impact and which change something. This was with the email. I mean, this was probably the most productive, in the sense that with a little amount of effort, I had the group of people who did it, I was organizing it and coordinating it, really did something which had a very huge impact. No? And now, then we changed from protocols. We worked a lot of years with the development of protocols. We did very nice things there, but this was not so successful in terms of results. Then we went to Isabel. This was very early, in the early 90s, in 93, 94. And well, these were probably the first global events based on video conferencing we could do, because we had access to the broadband networks with the collaboration of the telcos and in different European countries. This was the seed for all these developments in video conferencing, Linkia LICO, which is having now a lot of impact. So, I mean, Linkia LICO started, the seed of it was put in the early 90s, and it's still active. So these are the type of projects I really like. Now I am working in other things. We are working, for example, also in the web platforms, in services for the cloud. We are working very much now in also in firewall, with creating for smart cities and smart spaces and smart whatever. We are working also in data analysis and in many things. And but always we try to do something which has a technological impact, not just publications. No?
And I think that's very important, right? Because normally a lot of universities, I would assume, they use publications only as the only metric that matters, right? And in the end, a role of the university and a role of technology transfer is making things that matter, right? And you mentioned how companies, governments, universities, students, PhDs, etc., everyone is participating on that final impact. And actually, a result of that final impact, and again, our time is running out, but I couldn't finish the interview without asking this, is a spin-off, right? Companies that are gonna come out either because of the talented people that you have found during during this whole process, right? But not only. So it is not a secret that you and I were acquainted, and in fact we are partners in Masmiayo, a UPM spin-off that has LICO in its heart on that piece. And we have been innovating together with your department for almost 8 years. But this is not the only spin-offs that has happened. I know that the UPM has other spin-offs. In fact, UPM has Actua UPM, which is an entrepreneurship program almost to kind of create that companies with the students teachers and technology from the university that will eventually become a company that will give a proper service. So what is your vision around the spin-offs, and how do you see spin-offs playing a role in the university? And I know this is a complicated part, but I would like also for you to mention there are some teachers there that are very scientific, and these applications in companies sometimes it causes a little bit of friction. How do you battle those two worlds, right? The science and the entrepreneurship. How does that happen?
Well, I think that some person coming back from the Silicon Valley told me that in the Silicon Valley there were two types of research groups in the universities, which I think defines very well the situation. The DDs and the PPs. I don't know if you have heard this. The publish and perish, or their demo or die. So that there were groups that were guided by the rule publish or perish, which is I think is what happens in Europe. I mean, there is too much emphasis on publication. And he said in the Silicon Valley you find a lot of groups where demo or die is the rule they follow, and the basic thing is that they must provide something working which could lead to a spin-off. This was the basic idea. And so I like this very much. This was a very early something which was told to me many years ago, but it is still valid. And so I think that this is also a rule. I have been a little bit DD, demo or die. And I like also, I know you have to do publish or perish, but you have to be DD. I know I have been involved in several spin-offs, and I think they are very important. The university should be a spin-off generator. The university should promote and facilitate it, because at the long term, I mean, all these spin-offs are what make the countries powerful and economically powerful and economically solid. You can see it in the US, who has been extremely effective in the last year, and I think this should be done. It is difficult sometimes to discuss and to make some people understand this, because they are very traditional. But it is the same, this is not only with the entrepreneurship, it's with the video, with the MOOCs. They like the master class very much. They don't want to get engaged into new methodologies, but this is life. I mean, there is a very strong rejection towards changing by many people, and this has to be dealt with in entrepreneurship, in lecturing, in everything.
I think I am gonna tattoo myself with "demo or die" on my forehead. I think that's an excellent motto on that piece. And again, Juan,
absolutely,
I have to thank you, because it's been really insightful. I know it would be, and it's been a pleasure always to speak with someone with as much experience as you in all of these aspects of the technology transfer. You mentioned, right, one of a couple of things that would kind of make a difference at a larger scale. So maybe on this last minute that we have, and I know that we are already overrunning a little bit our time, but maybe on your last minute, if you could kind of summarize, right, what do you see kind of the next steps, right, in terms of your technology strategy? What do you see as the next steps, or the next meaningful step that you would like to take to continue your dedication to technology transfer?
Well, I must say that I am very near to retirement now. And so
you have been saying that for years, Juan. Come on.
What I will do, but I am very near. But I must say I'm still absolutely amazed by making new trials. Now I am very much focused in new learning methodologies. I think this is the key for the future. I mean, the world is changing at an exponential rate. Everything moves more quickly every minute it passes. And so we need to teach people much more effectively and quickly, and much more effectiveness. So I must say that now in what I am focusing is in creating more effective methods of learning and of teaching, and making the universities much more productive for example, I created a methodology out of these years of making MOOCs and video recordings. I think I have made thousands of micro lessons in video recording. The methodology is called AMIL, which stands for Active, Meaningful, Microinductive Learning. It works extremely well. It facilitates the learning of the students extremely much. And so I think that probably at the universities now, our main challenge is how to keep pace with all this increased rhythm of change we have. It's not only at the university, it's at every level, but I'm in the university. And so I think that our main challenge is how to teach better, how to make good technology, and in a much more effective way, such as students can learn much, much quicker and much, much better.
Juan, I always learn something there every time I speak with you. I know that our viewers probably learned a lot from this interview today. I wanted to thank you all for following these Spanish industry case studies, and of course, our guest, Juan Quemada, for this wonderful interview. Thank you very much, Juan. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much to you, Victor, and also to the organizer. It's a pleasure and honor for me to be here in a software engineering conference, because I think this is extremely important for today to promote good software engineering. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Juan. Bye.
Thank you, Juan, for this amazing presentation. We had the chance to meet Professor Juan Quemada in several occasions. The organizer of this track, they had different connection with Professor Juan Quemada, and I can tell you that the positive influence has been there all the time. So thank you for your participation in this track, but also for your work all this year. The next chat, the next talk is very interesting as well, for a couple of reasons. Because the topic itself is going to be about developing infrastructure with software engineering principle, is run by Javier Provecho. But all this magic that you are seeing today, all this production is done by Javier. So he has many, let's say, positive qualities. And so, yeah, thank you, Javier, also for the production. And then it's over to you.
So, hi everyone, welcome to my talk here at the International Conference of Software Engineers 2021. As we all know, we couldn't make it on site. It was going to be planned to be on Spain, but due to the circumstances, we are now performing it virtual. Welcome to my talk about how to develop infrastructure with software engineering principles. Let's get started. But first, who am I? So my name is Javier Provecho, and I'm a Google developer expert in cloud, focused on scalability, containers, and security. Recently, I started working with containers like the Docker or scheduler systems like Kubernetes, which led me into the scalability issues of distributed applications. And finally, in the last months, I have been performing a lot of the offensive security on how to escape these containers on these shared environments, because it's a very important task about that. I perform all of these abilities and tasks at Telefónica Tech as a senior platform software reliability engineer. And I also engage with the community with different meetups like Docker Madrid, Cloud Native Madrid, or Kubernetes Community Days Spain. I collaborate with local meetups in my town that are behind the big national conferences like Let's.conf or with CodeFest. And I also maintain an open source project called Jingonic, which is an open source HTTP web framework based in Golang. And that's resume about myself. Let's go. So this presentation is more about what's the journey that we followed at Telefónica Tech, specifically in my area, and how to develop infrastructure with software principles. But first, what's Telefónica Tech? Telefónica Tech is a group of enterprises, of companies, part of the Telefónica group, that they provide services to in a B2B efficient way, business to business, of different kinds, from cybersecurity, cloud, IoT, Internet of Things, big data, or blockchain. These services are provided to customers as with the guarantee of the Telefonica Group and part of the cybersecurity area, which specializes in products of cybersecurity for B2B and B2C customers. And Telefonica Tech capabilities right now reach more than 300,000 customers over 175 countries. That's a lot of clients and places to work with. So the organizational challenge that we had at Telefonica Tech in our area was mainly because of the number of projects that we manage, right? Our organization is comprised of many independent medium-large sizes projects with tens of components each that they are deployed to different clients and operative business units. Operative business units are the entities that Telefonica refers to when they want to sell a product. They do through the local units on each country. So we as a global company sell to these units, and these units sell to the clients directly. And because of that, there we have a lot of projects with tons of components each, and each one of these projects may have one or more instances of itself adapted to the specific requirements of its local sell point. And all of that is managed, all the technology is managed by what we call the technology plan that at that date defined the technologies to be used but not how to be used, right? What this means that we ended up having diverse architectures for each project, especially for infrastructure and networking. So maybe the project A follow with the same programming languages and infrastructure tools, but they use it in a different way from project B, and project C may have different requirements at all. So there was no real share of the architecture between projects, only the common components. So let me get started about a bit of the history of infrastructure to understand how we reach what we have today and why. Before of that is the interactive operations that were performed in person or remotely, and this happens before everything of infrastructure automation or DevOps. As you may know, a few years ago, 20 years ago, servers they were in provisioning with the click of a button. They were ordered, and in a few months they will arrive to your destination, and you will need to plug them in, provision, install the operative system, or configure all the specific storage arrays or whatever you had to work with. And this means that it translated into inflexible capacity plans that meant slower runtime times and lower uptimes due to rush hours, or the opposite, wasted resources on off-peak hours. That's the thing. So either you ordered a lot of servers and only use it for a fraction of their power, or you ordered not enough servers and you are always at 100%. Even more than 100% would lead to no uptime at all. And all of these servers, they were usually in an old cabinet that only have 2 or 3 people of the old enterprise had access for anything at all, from deploying or setting a new email account or whatever. It was a full restricted access with no administrative task let for other people. The sessions were usually over privileges because the admins, they were the only ones that were capable of working with the systems, and therefore they usually had a session that was either root or was capable of assuming root, and there were no session or scoped roles for each action. And finally, all these servers, it was continually getting bought and getting stacked up. There was a state different divergences, meaning that what it was agreed in the documentation by the development team, it wasn't translated to the reality in the in the real servers, in the real status of the servers. So maybe the server that you bought a year ago had a specific version of the software, and the next server that you install it in a few months will have a different version of the software because the previous wasn't available, or because it auto upgraded, and you don't have a real specific paper that pointed you must install this version and how to install this version, right? Or how to upgrade them. So this all implied a higher complexity on both upgrades, when you need to upgrade these old servers to newer versions, or when you need to update your deployment, and also incident solving, right? Because if you have a problem of security, you expect the system to be the same as in the specification. Try to use all the interfaces to solve the problem. If you don't have all that, because this server was corrected by a different person using a different technique, you will need to perform an investigation or research on the sound side. Later on, after all this interactive administration of servers, we reached the part of the configuration management tools, the age of the configuration management tools, and the age of DevOps in 2006 and 2009. And configuration management tools existed way back since 1993, but they were not so popular enough, and they started being popular with Puppet in 2006. Before that, it already started using some kinds of approaches to solve this problem, be some like domain-specific languages to hide platform differences, or to try to set all the requirements or the state that we want, that we desire to have the machines in a specific format, or in this case DSL, the domain specific language. In 2006, as I said, Puppet was released, and it was released as a declarative client-server software, meaning that we executed from our terminals, from the operator's terminals, and provisioned a remote automated IT infrastructure lifecycle. And in the next years, more projects followed with the same or different approaches, client server or server client, like Ansible, Salt, or Chef. In the right now years, this is very popular. A different tool like this called Terraform, that it features what it's called now infrastructure as code, or infrastructure as data, whatever you want to call it. Also in 2006, another event happened, and Amazon started with their public cloud and the services, what we call Amazon Web Services. Microsoft and Google and many other smaller enterprises followed the trend later. This means that we didn't need to buy the hardware of the servers. We can now host them. We can now rent them, and in a much faster and easier way, popularizing the model of pay-per-use. And in 2009, with all this starting ecosystem of tools and services, became the culture, what we call DevOps, that started as a culture for, among many other things distinct. For example, joining dev and ops teams. It also make operation teams use the same techniques the developers did to use for the systems. You see now how is this going, right? It means that operators no longer manipulate the instances directly, but started to get some of the techniques from these developers, like for example conversion control system, like it for saving some configuration changes, or starting to use their own continuous integration for their own purposes, not just for the developers, etc. And right now, modern infrastructure, what it's all about, it's about immutability and repeatable processes. And infrastructure dependencies with modern infrastructure are not modified at runtime. New images are created, and they will replace others at different levels. For example, if you have a container, you create a new container, and you switch the traffic between the two, replacing it effectively. But if you need a new type of node, for example, from Ubuntu, a specific version of Ubuntu to a newer version, what you will do will not upgrade in place the machine. You will directly remove it, or before create a new machine, move all the workloads to the new machine and remove the old machine, right? And all of this, which is made in a rolling update way, it facilitates the division between infrastructure and deployments by reducing the bottleneck of operation teams. What this means is that there were not just only these two people that work in the cabinet of the server room to work with the systems, but you can now start to give specific access to specific resources to specific teams of the company. So, for example, a developer team are auto-sufficient and can deploy themselves their service without requiring a full-scale operation in order to update their service. Finally, these infrastructure automation processes now expose APIs that allows to interact better with all these systems at all levels, and even the services like AWS or Google Cloud. And they allow to customize the behavior or event-driven decisions. For example, what type of event-driven decision we can make with this approach, either from auto-scaling when you have this rush hour or off-peak hours. You wouldn't need to buy these servers, you will order them, but maybe you are asleep. So with auto-scaling, it will automatically get triggered an event, and a machine will automatically create new servers on your behalf. So the peak hour can be assumed, the rush hour can be assumed. And another option of event-driven decisions will be in a secure incident prevention. For example, if you detect an execution inside one of your servers that shouldn't be there, you can automate the deletion of that machine. All of that is possible thanks to modern infrastructure. So what we finally get done with all these steps followed in our company, and all the requirements that I have been describing to you, means that us as the developer or platform team, and as in a previous talk that you may have heard with Pablo Moncada, it starts the figure of the platform team. And what it means. It means that you can now create some kind of infrastructure that is common for the whole enterprise. But this is not compatible with the Telefonica Tech model, because as different from what Pablo was describing, we had a lot of different projects and a lot of instances for these projects. So we need to be able to delegate this instance and this project to another team or another company that is outside of our scope. But how we do that without recreating the infrastructure another time, like reinventing the wheel? So we came up with the concept that is called the platform, and the platform is like an opinionated view, an official point of view of our tech plan, and it's an implementation of it. Not just the rules of how to follow, but the implementation from start to finish, an end-to-end implementation. And it follows three steps. The first one is that it homogenizes the infrastructure by providing useful building blocks and a common implementation, so you can easily manage your infrastructure following this the principle of the modern infrastructure of immutability and etc., but by managing bootstrapping and upgrades. This means that if you have an instance of platform and you need to upgrade it to a newer version of that platform, the implementation will take care of that. You don't need to make the steps required to perform that task. For a difference from modern infrastructure services like public cloud, where you can order servers with the point of a click or with the point of an event-driven decision automation, you can. You can't automate, or I mean, you need to automate it yourself, the switch from one instance to another. But with this platform, it's already taken care of. The second thing is about exposing standardized interfaces for working with the platform, especially with in the part related with identity. And this means that we are able to authenticate or authorize to specific teams to work with a specific part of the platform, like for example the personal namespace, or to work with that. But also we allow the workloads deployed inside the platform to interact with external services by having a specific identity and standardized token format, etc. All managed automatically by the platform. And finally, the observability capabilities, that is not the less, but is probably the most important, is how we can have a specific API, a specific point of entry to get what's happening inside the platform, or how you as a workload that is being deployed on the platform have the capability of exposing your own status to the outer world, right? So with these all 3 points, we are able to provide a specific implementation that can be transferable to different teams. For constructing all of this, which is a software project, we wanted to follow quality development practices and also have quality interfaces. And we follow this in between some others, but I want to feature these 4 software engineering principles: Solid, Jagni, Keys, and Rye. So let's start with each one of them. For the part of Solid, the single responsibility principle, its infrastructure module should not be affected by external changes outside of its scope, neither modify third-party resources directly. This means that if you have, for example, a module that defines the Kubernetes cluster, it shouldn't be affected by a change on how you are managing the network interfaces as long as it's connected. It's a somehow translation of these principles on how to develop infrastructure, because of course the installer and the platform that is being created here is made with software development, but it has a different approach on it. The next one part of Solid is the open closed principle, and this is probably the most important part of Solid applied to infrastructure, is for an easier upgradability, and means that you can add new features to the infrastructure, but you can modify the existing ones without marking it as a breaking change. Because that's very important, because if you apply an upgrade that is incompatible with an existing infrastructure, you just don't get a failure in the CI, you literally get the system down or probably data loss. So that's a very important one. The least code substitution principle means that if you have, for example, different properties that they are compatible with their parent or parent class, translated to infrastructure development means that if, for example, you are having this schema and you don't have a property that for a specific cloud provider that doesn't match the main schema, you should have it outside to avoid this problem, right? So in this case, it's also important if the platform is being developed for a multi-cloud environment, because not all services across all cloud providers are equal. We try to make some equivalences, like for example networking and compute, but for example the IAM policy generation is much different on each one. So we made a specific points on the schema to configure, for example, AWS or Azure. The interface segregation principle means that the infrastructure interfaces should be small and focused. So even if you have the open closed principle of Solid before, and you are able to add a lot of features to the platform, you should still have them small, because if you later move to a newer implementation in a different cloud provider or a different version, you will have a lot of trouble adapting a huge interface of that. And finally, the dependency inversion principle for the part of Solid, which means that higher level infrastructure modules shouldn't depend technically on specific things from the lower level. For example, if we are defining a Kubernetes cluster, we shouldn't ask directly for these properties. Instead, we should get it probably from a context. Next one is you are gonna need it, Yagi. And when iterating on the schema, on performing upgrades or just increasing the version, you should be able to deprecate those Unity infrastructure modules. The platform is not a registry of a lot of modules, some that get outdated or not. It's the complete version of everything in the platform must work. So if you are not able to support some part of it, you should remove it. The next one is the keep it simple. And it probably means that translated to infrastructure is to reduce the boilerplate over everything, whatever possible. If you don't need a tag to add to a node or anything else, remove it. If you have interfaces, keeping them small and concise. You don't need to add a lot of structures to it. For one simple comparison is to compare Docker Compose to, for example, Kubernetes manifests. Kubernetes manifests are so powerful, but the simplicity of having a service deployed in Docker Compose in 5 lines, if I'm not wrong, it's unbeatable by Kubernetes. And finally, don't repeat yourself. When you are having this schema, try to avoid specific redundant properties. For example, if you are defining the network and you are setting the VPC CIDR, the address range, don't repeat that same property down below in another part, for example, for Kubernetes, lest that module that is dependent on the previous one get the property from a context to obtain it. I'm going to show you how all of this translates to a real manifest. So here is, for example, an example. This is the manifest that we use it as a domain-specific language to define our infrastructure with our opinionated view of it. And as you can see, it's what we call a platform config that defines the region where it's going to be deployed, the name of the instance that is going to be deployed, maybe some labels for cost management, and specific settings for the cloud provider that we are going to be deployed, for example, AWS, but it could also be Azure, etc. Finally, we specify a section that is the first module and the base module for the networking, where we can define different types of networks with different properties and even routing and all this kind of stuff. And finally, we set the part of compute directly because it's a module that can depend directly on networking, and you don't need to recreate all these steps. So all of this is served as a package for other teams in the company to use it and to keep the work on. So that's all. Thank you very much for coming. I will be listening to your questions through all this talk, and see you later in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier, for your interesting talk. We are coming to the very last but not least talk today. This talk is a very interesting talk about a company working on the spatio-temporal data. So the talk is going to be about managing scalability in this kind of data. And this is delivered by Miguel Ángel Corella, which is the VP of Technology of GeoBlink. So yeah, we are going to start with this now, but don't forget that after this talk, we will have a panel with all the, with actually some of the speaker that they were presenting today. So stay with us a little bit more after this talk if you want to be part of this panel.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for inviting me. I am Miguel Ángel Corella. I am VP of Tech at GeoBlink. And the main goal of this talk is to share with you some high-level view of our approach to overcome the data scalability issues that we have faced as a 6-year-old startup that we are. Okay, so as the video mentioned, we are, at the end of the day, we are a location management platform that allow our customers to analyze a big amount of indicators for any given location at the geographies that we support in our tool. And to do so, we work with a variety of data sources that can be grouped roughly in 3 typologies that are pretty different in terms of time granularity, geographical granularity, homogeneity of the source, ease of retrieval, and all that kind of stuff. So the 3 big blocks are public data coming from official sources, mainly open data and usually managed by governments. Private data coming from GeoBlink partnerships with data providers such as BBVA, Orange, MasterCard, Location Science. And last, client data coming directly from our customers and that allow us to include internal business KPIs into our analysis. Despite of the type of source, any single piece of data that reaches GeoLink will always have a time reference, a time dimension that can go from timestamps to annual data, and geographical reference that can go from lat-long coordinates to even country-level data. So what's the challenge for us? The challenge is that we have this huge heterogeneity in the data sources we work with and in the different geographies we work with, that today is Spain, UK, and France, that we need to do some stuff with the data in order to make it usable for our final application. So first, we need to ingest information coming at pretty different granularity levels in terms of time and geography. Then we need to do our kind of magic. We need to do a lot of source mixing. We need to do to implement a lot of disaggregation models, statistical models, mathematical algorithms to homogenize and disaggregate all the data to the highest level of granularity possible, which for us, it's lat-long coordinates. It's what we call unit-level data, and that it used to be different between countries. So in Spain, it's cadastre parcels that represent almost a building. In the UK, it's full postcode, that it's almost an address. So we have this super granular level of information. Then we need to define and prepare what we understand like regions of interest for our customers that come into flavors. We have first administrative areas, which are polygons representing census sections, cities, municipalities, localities, or any single administrative area you can think of that will allow our customers to explore the territory as a whole. And then we have catchment areas, which at the end of the day are isochrones based on a transport mode that can be walking or driving and a distance in minutes around each of the client locations loaded into our app. And once we have all the information at lat-long coordinates level and we have these polygons, the last thing that we have to do is to aggregate everything, to do a ton of GIS operations, to intersections between polygons and points, to end up having information at region of interest level that allow our customers to perform their analysis. So this is the challenge. Our initial approach when GeoLink started, how we solve this challenge. As a growing startup, our first approach consists of the following in terms of data ingestion. We have our data scientist team, a team with several data scientists creating Python-based pipelines, almost one per source, including all the specific logic, all the methodology, all the steps required to disaggregate information from the granularity received in the source data to the point level data that we need for our analysis. The output of these pipelines was always stored as structured CSV files in a common repository that was implemented on top of AWS S3 without too much care in terms of naming, structure, or something like that. As our initial sources were mostly public data, and public data has the lowest granularity in terms of time, it's almost one single piece of data each year, we focus our approach on working with a snapshot. We get rid of all the historical information and focus on having always the most up-to-date information in our storage. And as you can imagine, at the beginning of time, we have few pipelines. So the management, execution, and monitoring of all this pipeline was done manually by the data scientist team. In terms of data transformation, again, our data scientist team created one master script, one huge script written in Python to rule them all, being in charge of the whole process to generate our database information. This is taking information from the snapshots stored in S3, communicating with the routing server, which is the service in charge of creating all these region of interest areas, communicating with PostgreSQL or PostGIS, which is the computation engine we used for all the aggregation processes we need to do for our use case, and storing all the results back into PostgreSQL, which was our main database, our selected database for storing all the information that will be consumed by the GeoLink app. Although, as you can see in the slide, some sources start to get pretty complex, and we end up being forced to have some part of our data stored in different locations, such as Amazon RDS. So with this approach, as you can imagine, it was super flexible. We have almost no rules, no restrictions, which allow us to grow fast because we can be super agile, adapting to our customer requests, adapting to everything. But as the sources increase, gaining complexity, and we reach bigger and bigger customers, several flaws start to rise up with this approach, such as we have data sources and pipeline heterogeneity. As I have said before, we have pre-ad hoc pipelines and methodologies for each specific source that makes pretty difficult to mix information and even to maintain. We do calculation at customer location level. As I have explained before, we are creating these catchment areas around each single customer location and try to aggregate everything. And that's super time consuming because we have to scale at the same time. The network of our customers is scaling, which is kind of tricky. We have performance issues. PostgreSQL is a great tool, it's a great database, but when you start to do some heavy lifting there and try to do a lot of stuff in terms of geography, it starts losing performance, and that's a problem for us. Overall, we have this manual management and orchestration of all our processes, and that's kind of crazy because we cannot grow in people at the same time our business grow. And we have some product features constrained by the current approach. As I have mentioned before, we have focused on having snapshots of data and getting rid of historical information. That cover most of our initial use cases, but as things start getting complex, our customers start asking about time series analysis, trend analysis, and all that kind of stuff that we cannot fulfill with the previous approach. So at the end of the day, we have a scalability issue, a big scalability issue, that forced us to redefine our data foundations. And this rethinking of our data architecture involves the official creation of 5 pretty different components that are the root of our new data strategy. The first one is our data lake. We have created one big, unique repository used as single source of truth for all our data architecture. That meaning that any single piece of data that reaches JobLink cannot be used by the app if it's not stored in the data lake. It's our single source of truth. We were using before S3 to store all our data. Right now, we are using also S3 for storing all the data in our data lake. But the difference here is that we have established well-defined rules in terms of structure, bucket naming, file organization, file naming. So we have defined common rules set up across the whole company in order to have one common way of storing information. Then we have moved away from CSV files. CSV files are great, but they tend to get too big when you are working with geographic information. And even if they store information in a structured way, they don't store a schema of the data, they don't store data types, and it relies on the component loading the data to infer that schema, and that not always work as good as it should. So we have get rid of CSV files, and we have moved to Parquet files. Parquet is quite standard in the industry, and it allows us to have super compressed information with embedded schema and in a format that is super fast to be loaded and super fast to be written. So that's great for our use case. In addition, we have adopted semantic versioning for our data files, not only for our code or for our packages, but we are using semantic versioning for our data files naming. That allows us to, only looking at the name of the files we have stored in the data lake, we can understand the data evolution, data tracking, data bug fixes that we have done. We can understand almost everything only taking a look at the naming of the files that we have stored in our data lake. And last but not least, we have moved away from, our pipelines have moved away from being executed in EC2 instances that were managed manually, that were scaled manually and in a vertical way. So when we reach the point of no return, we provision a bigger machine and launch our pipelines there, to using Kubernetes. We have created this cluster, this EKS cluster on Amazon infrastructure that allows us for automatic scalability and horizontal scalability. How we have created this cluster, it's a topic for a different talk, so I won't get too much in detail here. Then the second component of our architecture is what we call the JobLink Data Catalog. The same way we have a unique source of truth for data, we have a unique source of truth for pipeline definition. So we have decoupled pipeline configuration from pipeline execution and created this single repository of pipeline configuration. So we have created an internal definition, both for data entities and data operations, and represented them in a standard way. We have chosen JSON as language to represent this pipeline configuration, instead of having everything hard-coded in our master script that rule them all. We have made this standard definition kind of public inside the company. We have created a REST API using Fast API in order to have everyone in the company, both team members, both other systems in the company, querying the configuration and being able to understand the meaning and the data flow of each single piece of data that is available at JobLink. And last, we have restructured our data team so that everyone in each team can do what they do best. So data scientists will focus on what we need to do, and data engineers will focus on how to do it and try not to mix that kind of stuff. Then the computation engine, which we have called Ganesha for historical reasons, we have tried to move away from manual intervention. As I have mentioned before, we have a ton of manual intervention in our initial approach, and we have to get rid of that. And we have focused on using another standard in the industry, which right now is Apache Airflow, as our orchestration tool, because it gives us the ability to schedule pipelines, to monitor pipelines, log pipelines, and do everything we need with any single process of involving data in the company. So at the end of the day, we have managed to move away from updates on demand doing by the team to have something like continuous data integration. As soon as some piece of data reaches jobbing, it's almost automatically deployed to production. We have switched again from EC2 to ICSE as our base infrastructure to get rid of vertical scalability. And we have broken down every single pipeline into its foundation root operations, so we can create a dictionary of operators, allowing us to transform the configuration data scientists are doing in the catalog into actual processes. And in terms of computation engine, we have get rid of PostgreSQL because it's a great tool, but it scales pretty bad. So we have moved to BigQuery for GIS operation. It has been quite a change for us. BigQuery is proving a good tool for us, for our use case. It's been able to scale every single use case we have in JobLink right now. And it also allows us to create the fourth component of our data architecture, which is having one single data warehouse. We have embraced BigQuery as our unique source of data for both our app and our analytics team. We have this way remove all the heterogeneity we have in data sources. We don't need any more Postgres deployed in EC2 instances and RDS for some specific sources. We have everything integrated in one single and common structure. And using BigQuery, we can get rid of having to manage manually the scalability of our platform. We don't need to do some more vertical scalability to make Postgres be able to handle the amount of data we need to work with. And we can rely on a platform which is managed by Google to perform all this scalability. So we have moved from an infrastructure as a service managed internally to a fully platform as a service approach where almost zero maintenance is achieved. And last but not least, we have our data grid. Up until now, we work at unit level. That was specific per country, as I have mentioned before. We have this cadastre in Spain. We have full postcodes in the UK. And that makes things pretty tricky when we try to open a new geography. So in our new approach, we have based all our unit level in Uber H3 grid. We have selected this grid because it has three main advantages. The first one is that it's common worldwide. So we will have a unit level that is common for all the possible countries, all the possible geographies we can work with. They have defined the grid in different levels. So it has different levels of aggregation, and jumping from one to another, it's super easy and it's super straightforward. And that's great for our use case. And the last one is that they have found a quite good balance between visual attractiveness and geographic accuracy. And that's super good for our use cases. In terms of region of interest, at the beginning of time, we calculated all these isochrones, all the catchment area around any single location of our customers. Right now, we are, again, relying on the grid. We are calculating all the catchment areas for all the possible grids of a given geography. With that, what we reach at the end of the day is that we can predict the resources and the time that we'll consume to create all the data in our database. And we only need to do for our customers the mapping between their locations and the associated grid that has been already pre-calculated. And again, we have implemented all this grid, all the tools that we need to work with this grid, to manage this grid and to interact with this grid. We have implemented them inside BigQuery using UDFs, and that allows us to be able to use the same exact functions for the computation part and for the analytic and final consumption section. So as you can see, at the end, we have a new architecture that is much more robust in terms of data. We have a common data lake with common rules for formatting, naming, structuring of files, with data version capabilities. We have a computation approach that decouples pipeline definition from pipeline execution. We have a 100% automated approach thanks to Airflow that allow us to reach continuous data integration in production environments. We have a common data warehouse with a common schema that breaks all the silos, all the previous silos we have between sources, and allow our analytic teams and our app to consume huge amounts of data in a seamlessly way. So we have improved a lot. With this new approach, we have been able to increase speed. Previously, time to prepare our data for a given country takes around 10 days, something like that. And right now, we have been able to lower that down to 6 hours, more or less. We have gone from update on demand to continuous data integration. In terms of cost, surprisingly, moving from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service has allowed us to reduce cost, which is kind of counterintuitive. But the reality here is that we have been able to get rid of technology because we don't need it anymore. We have less management, and at the end of the day, that impacts directly in cost savings. In terms of features, with this new architecture, we can open up several use cases that were locked down before for us. We can integrate new sources, we can open new geographies, we can establish new partnerships and integrate all that data in no time into our infrastructure. And we can develop new features that have been longly requested from our customers, such as time series analysis, trends analysis, benchmarking, grid-based location search, and all that kind of stuff. And in terms of team, we have split the responsibilities. We have been able to split the work between data definition and data execution, and that allows our team members to focus on what they really do well. And so we have increased efficiency in our teams quite a bit. But as you know, with great power comes great responsibility. And as we implemented this new architecture, new risks and new challenges appear. Having automated data pipelines is great. Having automation in terms of data is always great. But what we need to be super clear here is that it's not enough to have working pipelines. We need to pay much more attention than before to data quality, because right now the data is being generated automatically. And having data quality monitoring becomes critical for a use case. In terms of cost, I have said before that we have saved a lot of money by moving to the new architecture. But we are moving to a platform in which storage costs much, much less than analysis. That's great, but needs to be super controlled, because if we have all the analytics team consuming BigQuery at the same time without any control, that can end pretty bad. And costs can increase hugely without any control. So cost monitoring and management and having policies for that becomes also critical for us. In terms of technology, as you know, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we know that the current technology, BigQuery, solves most of our use cases, but we are sure that it will not cover all of them. So we cannot be too attached to the new tech, and we have to keep agile, and we have to keep up to date in case a new component has to be added to the architecture we have defined. And in terms of teams, having these split responsibilities is great, but shared ownership of stuff implies team dependencies. And that's something that had to be managed carefully. Communication becomes super critical in JobLink, and we are dealing right now in working with this new type of doing things. And that's pretty much all from my side. Thank you very much for attending. I hope you find some of this stuff interesting. And if you have any question, just let me know.
Thank you, Miguel Angel, for your presentation. Really, really nice to see how you are using infrastructure to optimize your management of data, saving money as well. So that was the last talk for today. As I said before, we are going to have a short panel with some of the speakers that were participating in the track. That was not part of the initial schedule. So yeah, but in any case, we think that could be interesting to have a kind of a informal conversation with some of the speakers. So yeah, we can start introducing some of the. Okay, we have here some of the speaker, also organizer. Hi, Mario, Enrique, Victor, Javier.
Hello, everyone.
Unfortunately, we couldn't have all of them, so I don't know if there is anyone else coming. Victor, is Juan coming?
I don't have a confirmation from him. I know that he would try, so we'll see if he joins us. Maybe when we have already started the session.
We have also here Gonzalo. Javier, can you add him? Okay. Now we need to see him.
Yeah, that's a snap camera. I think Gonzalo's gonna surprise us with some augmented reality filters or something.
I have the.
No, sorry about that. I don't know what's happening with my camera. I wish it was that.
If you have problems with the camera, I have the perfect thing for that.
I think that you are very prepared.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining. As I mentioned, this is kind of an informal conversation with some of the speakers and also program organizer. So I was
sorry to interrupt, but we have Juan Quemada just now, so I'm going to add him.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay,
hello Juan, nice to have you too.
Hi, nice to have you be here. Thank you.
Okay, so I was just introducing a little bit the session. Is as I said, is quite informal. I was writing down here some question, but maybe there is maybe we can establish some kind of sequence of participants. Anyone wants to start? Probably I saw some interesting question for Mario and also for Manrique, Juan. So yeah, who wants to be first?
I mean, fire away. Almo, if you want, I have also some for Mario too, and for the rest of our speakers. But yeah, I've been enjoying this quite a bit. But please, Almo, go ahead.
So yeah, actually, I was again writing down here some question, and it's funny because I was talking with Robert Nyman a couple of months ago. He is now in paternity leave, but we were talking about how he was basically working with some partners around a very interesting project, which is Open Web Doc. So that was one of the reasons, not was the only, but that was one of the reasons for me to recall about Igalia and how they were contributing to the open source projects. So I don't know, Mario, if you are aware of this Open Web Doc project, but it would be great if you could say something about this, because this is kind of a next step. So you were mentioning a lot of contribution to the Chromium project, but this is helping others to learn about web technologies, which is really important. I know that Mozilla was doing a great job here, but now they are like again, additional partner helping with that. So I don't know if you have something to share about that.
Well, actually, I'm not that familiar with that. I know it exists. We are a big company now. Well, not a big company, but we have so many different teams, and I'm part of the Chromium team, so I'm mostly focused on that part. But what I can tell you is, we have definitely people working on that, and we have, in particular, there is Brian Cardell. I don't know if you heard of him. He's an Italian as well, and he's been quite involved with all those kind of things, pushing them. So I'm sorry I don't have a specific answer for that, but I guess what the best I can do is to give you that pointer. If he's usually very active on Twitter, and he loves to have this conversation and tell you more than that. But I'm sorry, I'm mostly familiar with the Chromium ecosystem and the implementation details mostly. So I cannot answer that thing, I guess.
So I understand, but I don't know if you want to say something, because we were considering two different talks about coming from Igalia. So trying to focus more on technology, we went for your talk, but actually Igalia has kind of a foundation principle contribute back to the society thanks to open source. So again, what I see here is that obviously you have been contributing a lot to the technology itself, but with this Open Web Doc and many others, maybe it's a way to highlight even more your commitment with open source from the
Yeah, I mean, I cannot talk into detail about that particular, but what you said is exactly true. So the very same reason why Galia was founded was to not just to have a job, so to say, but also to contribute back to society. And I know it sounds like very utopic, but it's actually, in this particular case, is actually like that. And contributing to open source fits perfectly into that idea. And contributing to projects like, it's not just Chromium, it's actually contributing to the web commons, to the web platform itself, because Chromium is a particular web engine, but we also contribute to WebKit and Mozilla, and the whole idea. And also we do a big effort in fixing and working in interoperability related issues. And documentation is also crucial for that. So that's what I actually wanted to point you into Brian, because he will love to have this conversation with you. But just wanted to highlight as well, another recent initiative that we tried last year was the open prioritization initiative. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And that we selected a few features that needed to be implemented in the web platform, and nobody was funding. And we basically did some kind of crowdfunding to see who would like to see this feature implemented, and to gather some a feeling of the community, what they wanted, and the winning option will be the one that will get implemented by us, and that was actually pushed a lot by Brian again. Sorry to bring the name so many times, and I guess it's another good example of our commitment to improving the web commons, not just particularly working in an engine or another, which at the end of the day is the way that we normally do it, but also with specifications as well. Like I don't know who was, I think it was Victor who mentioned that he used CSS Grid and he didn't know that we had some involvement with that. So I guess that's another good example of our involvement. I mean, we got paid by a customer, but there's a really long-term relationship with them, and the end result is that that the whole web benefits from that, and nobody was implementing it, so they couldn't do it themselves, so they called us, we established a relationship, and CSS Grid is now a reality in Chromium.
That's great. So actually, I was working recently in a project that we just launched during Google I/O, which is called Dev Library. So that was the reason to talk with Robert Nyman about this thing. So maybe I really appreciate if you could introduce Ryan offline in a mail, because I would like to talk with him about these things and how to connect initiative. So thank you for sharing the contact.
Yep, no, definitely. He'll love that. We do.
Okay. That was mine. Probably someone else has another question. So
yes, so if you don't mind, I'm gonna go with one. We have been speaking quite a bit about open source, right? Today, and I had a controversial question for any of you to pick up, really. But as you know, we have seen lately, right, in the open source world, quite a controversial issue, right? We had someone that has been doing research, experimentation, call it whatever you might, by basically putting fake PRs and fake, if you want, vulnerabilities on the Linux kernel, right? And that honestly feels a bit like a very kind of mixed feelings come up when something like this happens, right? Because all of us use very likely the code of the kernel, right? In many of the open source things that we use around our own infrastructure, and we want it to be secure. But also all of us are also kind of putting open source code and open source effort, and probably dislike quite a bit being experimented on by a coordinated initiative like this one. And managing open source is already hard enough, probably without having that. So in that mixture of mixed feelings that I'm sure many of us have, I don't know, again, Mario, Manrique, Juan, any of you that work very much with research and with open source, if you have an opinion on this. But honestly, I would like to know a little bit more on what do you think.
Who wants to take the question to reply?
I think you already did.
No, go for it, Manrique.
No, actually, I don't have all the details actually about how the things has worked and the time that took to things get solved or fixed. But for me, it was interesting to see that, okay, you can try to fake things in open source collaboratively, and probably you can make it happen. And you might think, okay, this means that open source is not that secure because a bunch of people doing coordinate things can create vulnerabilities in the code or fake things on that. But the things were solved. And we have similar cases with proprietary or non-open source code in the past. Like, for example, the Siemens code that was used to build the freezing machines to freeze water for services in Iran, people were able to introduce vulnerabilities to crack that systems to avoid Iran people to have nuclear power engines working. So things can happen on any kind of software. In any case, I think one of the things I've seen that I think is crucial or is happening that is very important is how companies and organizations are understanding they need to manage their relationship with open source because, as you said, they are using open source, they are contributing to open source, and even they are releasing open source. And you need to manage that relationship because at the end of the day, it's basically, that's also my personal opinion. Once something is open source, it's not yours anymore, but you are part of that ecosystem. And keeping the ecosystem healthy will make us happier in the long term, I would say. And that's something that I'm seeing in companies that creating this little organization inside the company that is called the OSPO, Open Source Program Office, and is the organization of the set of people in the company, the government. Now Europe has an OSPO too, so the European Commission. But the idea is you have a set of people that is able to manage things like, okay, I need to scan the code to be sure that everything is controlled in terms of vulnerabilities, but also to take into account intellectual property, licensing, also to ensure that there is a healthy community around the projects that I'm using or contributing to, or my upstream contributions are going well. So that's probably my fair contribution to your question.
That's good. And I don't know if Mario or Juan want to add anything to that comment. If not, I have another question.
Well, just a little bit. I mean, I think also that this is not a question of open source only. I think this is a general question. Software creation, maintenance, and software protection is something which is very difficult. If it's commercial, well, you can have also ways to introduce fake code or things like that. Exactly. If it's open, there exists ways to do it. But on the other hand, there exists also a much larger community who is watching what is happening. And this helps in making auditories and finding out the problems. And so I think at the end, it's a little bit the same. I mean, software is very difficult, and good software engineering is very much needed. And the community is fundamental, I think, for having large projects. They are impossible without it. So I would say that this is not really a problem of open software.
Wonderful. No, and I completely agree, right? I mean, one of the things that one of the reasons MatchMe and many of your use cases that we have seen over the all of the talks that we have seen today, and especially you, Juan, that I think put it into a very good sentence, right? Of using basically the community as the higher standard, right? And is your but at the same time, the community is your standard, and at the same time, it's also your guarantee in terms of that there are many more eyes looking to kind of make that code excellent for anyone in the community involved on using it. And I think that's really loable, right? In those terms. This one is for Mario. My next question. Sorry, please, Javier.
I think I have an experience to share about the question that you were asking previously, and it's about how the community can watch for this kind of behaviors or bad behaviors. I'm maintaining since 3 years ago a framework in Go. It's called Gingonic. Well, I have been a bit disconnected from it, but from time to time I look for it. It's already been maintained by the other people. But a few months ago, it happened that someone thought he discovered a vulnerability into the project, and it was related somehow to spoof the headers of the when you are contacting with the framework. The framework may choose to how to say the X-forwarded for headers. If you know what I mean, these headers allows you to set a different IP for the requester of a petition, and he thought that because the default was false, it was a vulnerability. And there are a lot of projects that may use a insecure default in their projects, but that's not exactly a vulnerability by default. But because it was a few months unattended by me, it created a lot of community around it, asking that it was a critical vulnerability, must be corrected and everything else. And the proposed fix they wanted to merge into the framework was a real vulnerability. And it was how to say so clear that it was so bad, but it impressed me that the community didn't notice about it. Maybe they noticed and most of the people don't say anything, but there were a lot of people saying, oh, this is a critical vulnerability, you must merge this right now because it's already wrong now and it should be okay. And it was crazy. But the peer that was supposedly trying to fix it, after analyzing a few times, it was introducing a vulnerability.
It is funny because both inside and outside the classroom, Juan used to tell me a lot, software is hard, humans are harder. So on that piece, and he was absolutely right every single time that he mentioned that. So Mario, back to you. Originally, this track had the name Spanish myth busting, right? On that aspect, and there is kind of a lot. We are very good at underwhelming and basically overshadowing ourselves. And I was very impressed when you were sharing your slides, right? To see Igalia basically beating Microsoft consistently in many of those, even though Microsoft was catching up. But having a Spanish company, having that ability, right, to be a meaningful contributor, the second most meaningful after Google on that part. And again, most of the people that is using Chrome and something like Grid CSS as I am every single day won't know that. What is needed do you think to kind of recognize what the Spanish industry and the Spanish contribution are making to standards, web engines, and many other things that we are seeing? What do you think is the next step to being recognized at that level?
So you mean for Igalia or in general for
Igalia and in the general industry?
So, well, the first thing I just want to point out is that you said that we were beating Microsoft. I just want to clarify that we are not beating anyone.
I know.
No, but even like that, I mean, obviously we are very proud because we are a small company. We are around 100 people company right now, and the team of people working on Chromium is just about 30 something people, 33, 35, I think right now. And Microsoft is a huge company, and they actually have way more people. But it's not a competition, as I said in the talk. The reason why we reached that point is because we so many years working not just in Chromium but also in WebKit and other web engines. So it's a lot of dedication that we have been doing for many years, and obviously, and especially, I feel very proud. I mean, even if it's not just myself, it's my team of seeing that we are there. The fact that Microsoft is catching up is actually great because they announced like a couple of years ago that they were switching to Edge, and
I think you may have muted yourself, Mario. Sorry.
Your mic stopped working.
Yeah, we stop hearing you. Sure, no problem. We can wait.
You can hear me now?
We have you back.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Probably slightly worse, but it's okay. I was saying, I don't know what I was saying. That we started working a long time ago, and that the fact that Microsoft is having so many contributions is great. And at the moment I learned that they were switching into Edge, I personally was very happy because I thought, this means another big company. I mean, we are doing a lot of work, and that's really great. But it's also nice to, in my opinion, this is my opinion. I'm just disclaimer. in my opinion, it's very good to have another big company, like kind of the size of Google, also entering the same project, and they are doing great work. And so obviously, it's just a matter of time that they. I was saying catching up, but almost kind of joking, because it's just a matter of time that if you pour so many people and working in an entire new browser, well, that's simply obvious. But that doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't diminish our work, and I'm still very proud. And even if we become third, I just don't really care. Now, trying to answer the second part of your question, that what was the next step? What needs to be done to get here? I mean, I guess the recipe in this particular case is you just keep doing what you're doing, but trying to do your best, trying to look. We always try to do the best, not just, as I said before, not just for a particular web engine, but for the entire web platform. I have obviously the vision. I'm more focused on Chromium ecosystem because that's my team. But that's what I wanted. I suggested before to talk to Brian, because he has a wider vision of the entire thing. And I think that is, I mean, I don't want to sound weird, but I think it's starting to pay off that we invested in an open technology. Initially, Galia started with genome technologies, and we still have a very strong link to that community. But the fact that we bet very hard in working into open source projects, open source communities, and also very importantly in an open source way, even internally the company. That's for another talk, I guess. I think it's paying off, and that combined with trying to keep the dedication and the motivation and trying to do the right thing all the time and keep pushing and pushing and pushing, eventually took it to this place. Now I don't have any magic recipe. I think one thing, and I'm going to finish or try to. One thing that I'm very happy about this entire story, besides being proud, is that, in my opinion, this kind of proves that the open source model is a great model, not just for companies that can benefit of what can be created in an open source community in an open way, but it's also a way for companies, small companies like Igalia or many other companies, to have a chance to compete in the worldwide market. I mean, you don't have to develop your own web engine from scratch. But you can, if you put enough time and energy into it, you can get relevant enough, and you can start contributing and building your way up, and eventually being where we are right now, or and beyond. And the same applies to Vitergia, I think, as well. Like, just to give an example.
I think that is an amazing insight. Thank you, Mario, for that. And in fact, my next question was very related. It's the perfect segue, because I wanted to speak with Manrique about Vitergia and kind of the, if you want, evolution or the adaptation of the business model, right? You have mentioned something that I think it was super important, and is your release of the first product that anyone can go to the website and buy, and how you have been doing and living out of very well, I'm sure, from consultancy, right, for many years. And that is kind of, I think, a misconception, right? Another one of those myths of open source working as consultancy with the only business model. And it's not the case at all, actually. There is plenty more that can be done in terms of that. So how it's been for Vitergia, that kind of opening up to other things different than consultancy, which again, very respectable, but not the only way to monetize open source and to grow together with open source. So can you tell us a little bit, Manrique, about this?
Yes, and actually, I always say this is an ongoing discussion in Vitergia, that are we a consulting, a product, or what company? And basically, it's about providing data and insights about software development to other companies. And of course, we started, and it's a big business for us, is related with consultancy, because when we are talking with big foundations or big companies, they want the specific questions, and basically there is no tool to solve the questions. It's basically you need to adapt, you need to understand the questions, and then you can work on the data and the insights. But of course, after more than 15 years of research about how open source is being developed collaboratively, it was time to, okay, why not all this technology we have, how we can put it easy on the market to people to use it? And then we released this Cauldron thing, this Cauldron.io. And initially, it was not even a product. It was, okay, let's release this and let's see if there is people willing to use this by themselves. And probably if we reach a certain amount of people, now more than 3,000 people, if we reach that amount of people, maybe there are people willing to pay for just hosting the thing by ourselves to them, so to save them time. Because the other thing that we have also seen during this years is our main business is based on we save people time to get insights and understanding software development. Because of course, and to be honest, getting data is so easy. Understanding the information on that data is the crucial point, because it's go to an API, you get data, you have a row of data, trillions of data, and it's like, okay, what I do with this? How I can guess how much time I'm using to solve issues from people from outside my company? How I can see which are the top contributors to WebKit? Because for me, Igalia is a reference how to build a business model based on open source. Of course, Google, Microsoft, these big companies are doing a lot of contributions in open source. But if you want to hire a company to do a specific development for your browser because you are going to put it on your car, on your wearables, who are going to hire? Are you going to hire Samsung? Are you going to hire Google? No, you are going to hire a small company that is doing the perfect things. That's Igalia. Okay, you are on the other side. That's it. And that's smart. That is okay. I'm using this technology to build a business, and that's usually my conception about: are there really open source companies, or open source is there to be used by companies to build business? That is very different. Open source is not a business model; it's a mean to build your own business model. So you need to be smart enough to build your business model on that. That's my tip here.
Absolutely, and that is true absolutely everywhere, probably. So yeah, thank you for that. Gonzalo, I imagine that you have your own questions too, so please.
Yes, so a question for Manrique. So,
and
yeah, no, it's quite easy. So it's about the relationship between open source and inner source, and it's not only the data. If you want to move, all these very nice practices that we find when developing open source, and then, we go to big companies that they're talking a lot about inner source. So they say, okay, this is how we work on the open source. No, what do you tell them? How do you, try to put them in the right path? Because the way they develop, it's pretty different. No, so yeah. What are the the nice conversations, challenges that you see there?
No, and that's a very good question, because inner source, this is a concept we started working with the inner source commons community, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. And for us, it was, okay, this is the perfect discourse we can use from open source, how open source is being built. And we now see that open source is everywhere, is successful. People are using the Linux kernel, even if people are faking code there. So how we can that apply internally in our companies? And actually, the pain points managing software development in some big companies is actually related with, there are silos of software development, the same team or different teams developing the same thing in different countries, in different parts of the organization. There is not reusability of the code. I have people say, no, I'm writing code that I want to hide in my drawer because I don't want anyone to see that. And okay, how you can do it in open source way? And of course, you can say to them, you can go open source. And imagine banks, insurance companies, big IT companies. No, we are not going open source. So inner source gives you a framework. Okay, you can apply open source methodologies of way of working internal in your company, and you can be more effective. And when you are giving some numbers like, okay, OpenStack or the Linux kernel is like 6,000 contributors working yearly. How many people is doing IT in your company? And I remember one bank saying to me, 30,000 people. And I say, okay, if you are doing 30,000 people doing code, you should be reinventing yourself each year, not having this crappy application that is not working for the backend. So there is something in the management that is lost. And of course, there are many pain points. I recommend you a lot to go to the Inner Source Commons website, check the patterns, because now we are working on the patterns, on documentation, and we have some use cases to be presented soon from Spain. And we are working with a couple of companies applying inner source in their sector, and it's very challenging. But for me, it's very, I would say, like the perfect job. It's like I want to arrive to the company, and it's like in open source. I love to work in web technology. So I go to web projects. Oh, I'm going to contribute to this one. Imagine working in a company that is the karma, perfect scenario, that is paying to do whatever you want, but they are giving you the means to do, oh, I love MassMe stream technology, so I can contribute here because they are paying me to do that, and they are providing me the means to drive that thing. Of course,
but
it's challenging.
probably you will agree that technology can be difficult, but in this context, people are way more difficult, no?
Yeah, very difficult. Reinos de taifas, we say in Spanish, you know.
Yeah.
So I have a kind of consideration and trying to wrap up with that question, because we have been talking about open source communities, how important the contribution from different companies are for the quality, the security of this open source. But at the same time, when I was listening the conversation with Juan before, I realized a couple of things. So he was one of the probably first professor in Spain in contact with these open source communities. Obviously, he was contributing, he was developing a lot, but he mentioned something really important for me at the end, which is open source communities are also becoming more and more important in the way that the people learn about technologies. So probably we see a kind of a transition from 30 years ago when I was in the university learning a quite structured way. And now also because my job, I realized that there are plenty of people, thousands of people, millions of people probably in the world learning, balancing quite well what they get in the universities, what they learn from the communities. So I would like to know your opinion, Juan, about this, how to balance what is going to be the importance of these open source communities to help the new generation of software engineers to learn how to do technology. Juan, I think that you are
You're
muted.
muted, Juan. Sorry, yes.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Well, you have made a very good question. I mean, because when you have to teach technology, it's very difficult to select the technology you will be using for illustrating some theory, some concept, or whatever. So when today, in the early days of software and technology, digital technology, it was very difficult because the best tools were mainly commercial ones. And using commercial tools for organizing your courses and your teaching is not very easy. It's very expensive. It leads to many strange situations. And so now that there are very, very good tools, which are even, I would say, leading standards in the world, like in software engineering, you have JIT, which is something which is very difficult to beat. You may have similar commercial tools, but at least you have one open source tool which is on the top, leading. So things get much more easier. And I think for us, for the persons who have to to teach things and guide students how to learn, having good open software tool is the best thing we can have. If they are capable of illustrating everything we must teach. For example, in my courses, when JIT started to be a standard in the software engineering world, it was extremely good because it could be used for teaching, for organizing projects among the students, and also for the last year students, for the master thesis and all type of works. And so this makes it, for example, the web platform. I've been working mainly in the last years in the web platform standards, so in teaching with JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, Node.js, structuring everything with JIT. And this makes that your effort is much more reusable also by third parties. So you can also generate content which is reusable by other universities, by other. One of the mocks with Victor mentioned yesterday, which was the first we did, which was how to design web apps, which HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, for example, is perfect in this sense because, well, it was one of our courses at the universities for something we called computación en red, internet application design or internet. And so this was what we teach in our courses. It was a third year telecom engineering course, which is a relatively high course, but we also could present it and in courses, in MOOCs, which have had hundreds of thousands of people registered and learned it. And well, this makes everything very easy, and I think this should be the way to go, no? Because, well, you can, today we have, like you have so private and public things, you have also free software and commercial software, which are very much intertwined. And so, I mean, the main carrier is the free software, I think, and this is perfect for teaching.
I'm really sure that there is a lot of people happy to hear that open source is the way. So, following this conversation, I have a question for Javier, because actually that is related also with my own research. Recently, I defend my own PhD trying to introduce, let's say, engineering perspective to open source. And I say perspective because obviously open source is a high quality process and software most of the time, but in some way we need to teach how to understand these quality processes, these activities, and that was part of my own research. But the talk that Javier delivered today, it was introducing DevOps with an engineering practice or whatever. So I think that in some way, when you start to introduce this agile approach to infrastructure management, there are plenty of things that you have to do, but also you have to, let's say, educate the executive. You have to educate the internal teams, because many of them, they are not familiar with this technique. So I would like to know his experience about this. What did you find the most difficult task introducing these engineering practices or processes for infrastructure management in your company?
So probably two things. One of them will be versioning the infrastructure, because in many companies infrastructure is not composed of instances. It's like in the case of Pablo described it, like a big cluster or maybe two clusters, but they have names on it. I mean, they are not presentable, and you are not used to destroy, recreate them, or change them frequently. I mean, at the root level, you change what is inside them, but not the cluster itself. And having to explain that the platform would have a version, and that version may be deprecated, and you need to this cluster must end its life, and you need to create a new one, and you need to work on processes to upgrade from one to another. These processes that were limited previously only to the applications above the cluster, and now they are going also down to the cluster. It's something that it's not always freshly accepted, because infrastructure is probably the most simple way. It's like the wheels of the car, but you need to explain that these wheels may have different types, and you maybe in winter you need to change the wheels for different types. So it's most the same way with infrastructure. So that's probably the biggest challenge.
So thank you for these details. We are almost running a little bit over the time. So I would like to thank you all to be part of this session. I think it was really interesting. We would like to have something similar maybe next year with a little bit more time, and to probably extending the invitation to more companies. So probably you will hear from us some point in the fall. But in any case, thank you for being part of this. I would like to mention also Aurora Barrero, who has been helping the organizer of the track, but unfortunately he couldn't attend the session today for personal situation. But at the end, we have been working a lot in the preparation of these things. I really think that we have a lot of experience to share from the open source, from the software engineering point of view. So yeah, thank you all for coming, and hopefully we will see you next year in a new edition of this software engineer Miss Bastin.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you to you
Bye.
too.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.